welcome to the Integrated Care Board for Cornwall and the Isles of Scilly. So we'll get straight on to the agenda if that's all right. In terms of some of the apologies, the most notable one, if I can put it that, with the exception of upsetting anybody else, is we don't have our Chief Executive here. So Kate, unfortunately, had an emergency operation a couple of days ago. So I think it's a pretty good excuse. I believe, Steve, she went to Trellisk. I believe she went to Trellisk.
Yeah, we certainly wish her every best wishes in her recovery.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think she's home recovering well at the moment.
Yes, I spoke to her last night. So we wish Kate well. Also, Trudy isn't here. She has a family bereavement.
Yeah, unfortunately, she's had a family bereavement.
Okay, so in terms of taking the minutes, Sam, who's not here, but on the call, will be taking the minutes this morning. Rachel Wigglesworth is delayed in traffic. I haven't had apologies, but I think we're expecting Margaret and Debbie, and I think that's about it, unless anybody else can see anybody else. Tim's on the call, and I can see Emma. Okay, so are we happy to move on? Yeah. So, declarations of interest. Anything different from what is in the paper? Anything relating to the paper anyone wants to declare? Still interested? Yeah? All right, good. That's my declaration of interest done. Okay, so we move on to the questions from the public. So we've had two from memory, and I think they're both being answered by Simon. So, Simon, can I invite you to respond to the two questions, please?
Yeah, I think there were the two questions. One was about where we're sort of reflecting back our estate strategy as a system and how that's seen in terms of supporting the way forward for Cornwall. So it was just to underline, because I think we haven't specified it as an explicit item within our priorities, it's just to make clear that there is a strategic estates group that I now chair, which has the remit of developing a strategy across Cornwall for estates, and I'll also be, as part of that, making the links with the local authority. So we take sort of full advantage of the estate we have available to us across the system. So it was to underline that. I think the other part of the question talked about the position on the Women's and Children's Hospital. I'm sure colleagues can add to this, but I would just say at this stage it's still going through OBC, the outline business case approval process. It's now sitting with NHSEI. We've supported the process officially as an ICB, and we're waiting for it to go through that process with NHSEI and expect an update. I think there was some mention about the case includes, as you'd expect with any business case, explicit requirements in terms of delivering efficiency to support the value for money side of the development, as well as the important side of delivering improved service. So clearly, I'm just underlining the fact it has that in there. It's a prerequisite of any business case that's pulled together, and in terms of a significant development, which this is, then that's features prominently in the case, and we support what's described in there to date. So we're expecting a number of months to go by before we get a final view. I don't know, Steve, whether you've got anything else to add to that in terms of an update from your perspective.
Yeah, thanks, Simon. So the business case has been accepted into the detailed review stage, and we would currently expect that there would be a joint investment committee towards the end of January 2023 as the formal consideration of that business case. That's the indicative timescale that we've been given so far. All of the things being equal, Simon would expect the formal business case consideration then, and we would be optimistic at this stage that we would expect that to be favourably considered.
Thank you. The other question I think was about the release nationally of 500 million to support social care and the sort of impact it has on improving discharges into the system and away from the acute community hospital environment. And we're still, the official NHSEI line, we still have no confirmation of what that is and what that means patch by patch. Well, there are calls actually happening nationally today and tomorrow with Julian Kelly, where he's giving us an update on the 22-23 position and 23-24 positions. So I'm hoping we get some clarity through that. I don't know whether any local authority colleagues have got anything else they can add from their understanding. My view is that there probably isn't any other update to give at this stage.
No?
Okay.
Okay, I can see, Paul, you want to ask a question?
Well, morning everybody, morning colleagues. It was just as you would imagine from the Isles of City. Please don't forget us, because obviously in terms of the property strategy, you know, one of the bids was around an integrated care facility on the islands at the hospital site, which may or may not be successful. But if not successful, we do need to still have that issue discussed with colleagues, and we have been working with the One Public Estate team for many years on that project and still continue to work on it. So if there is a strategic group being included would be great, please.
I think that's it, John. Thank you very much.
And the 500,000, 500 million. Yeah, I'm just saying, as Rachel's now here, is there anything else?
I would just say from an NHS perspective, we haven't got any specific update on the allocation of that money. I'm not sure whether there's anything else down the local authority line that
No,
you can
absolutely. The portfolio holder asked a question for an update to Secretary of State, and there's been no response. We're still awaiting.
Thank you for that update. Mario.
Going back to the Women and Children's Hospital, the delay that we heard about for the completion kind of leaked out. I don't think it was. I don't think there was a formal announcement, and I kind of understand why it's not something you particularly want to shout about. But it would be better if there are key milestones along the way between now and when the project is right for completion, that the public are let known by the NHS rather than through indirect sources.
Okay.
Thank you. I'll pick that up and work with our CHT colleagues if that's not already clear. But thank you.
Thank you very much. So let's move on. Item 4 is the minute. So I'm not going to page turn. I think we're all grown-ups. Anything you want to raise in terms of accuracy or changes? Yes, Ella.
Could you just add my name to the attendees, please?
So, Sam, who's on the call, acting as our minute taker, if you could do that. Carolyn, you're going to try and capture some of these points for me as well. I think the general direction, and Sam, if you can just make sure, I'd be very grateful. The minutes are getting rather longer than I'd hoped, if I'm honest with you. And if we could just shift the balance between maybe slightly less about repeating what everyone has said and more about focusing on the decisions and actions that we can pick up on, I think that might actually help all of us use the minutes between board meetings as well. But we're learning by doing, so approved. Yes? Is that Emma?
Sorry. Yes, it is. Sorry, John. Just to say that I'm listed in both parts 1 and 2 as a participant, and I think we should be down as an attendee.
Yes. There. Thank you. Corrected. And is there... That's done. No more hands. It's the difficulty of working on Teams as well. Minutes done, everyone. So let's move on to item 5. So the chair's update. So I'm not going to go through it. Hopefully it's all, as always, it's as read. I think, though, I just wanted to sort of reflect on the huge amount of work that the executives across all parts and officers across all parts of the system are doing at a time of huge stress and workload. And to be able to pull this kind of work together over all the papers as well, I just want to reach out and say thank you for that, because it's a huge commitment in terms of time and effort. And trying to get across what is this new entity called the Integrated Care Board, not just your own organisation to sign up to some of these papers, but as much as we can, all partners to sign up to these. So it's a big ask, and I think we should just recognise that. So thank you to the executives across all of that. I'm sure, Steve, you'll want to go into this a little bit later on, but I remark in my report, I'm getting fed back in terms of the green shoots of success of some of the work that's going on in terms of discharge and flow and ambulance and that kind of thing. So I would encourage you to do that. I think the whole board is utterly focused on flow, discharge and the delay issues that come with that. But also I would encourage, I know that Kate's not here, but as you're helping step in, Susan, if that's all right, encourage you to share what I've had fed back since this was written about the success of our SCC control centre being set up and how that's done. So if you could pick that up under Kate's report, that'd be great. So, we've got lots of things that we're trying to work our way through on, but there are some great moments of success that we should celebrate, because if we forget those, it becomes a pretty dull day, doesn't it, really? So I just wanted to say that. I think we do need to recognise the place we're in. If we don't make big steps on behalf of our patients and citizens, and that should be our main focus, but it will have the implications of getting assistance from others outside of county if we're not careful. That's not the reason to do it, but we just need to be sensitive to that. But I think what we're seeing is, dare I use the phrase turnaround? But certainly improvement, to be able to improvements, green shoots. Thank you.
With green shoots.
Green shoots, but we should recognise those. So there we are. So there are any questions that you would like to ask? Because the one point I want to move on to from my report is looking to the future. But is there anything that's in my report on the here and now that you would like to pick up or comment on? No? Great. So the other point I would like us to do is recognising that we've got an immediacy of winter, an immediacy of discharge and flow. We can't trade one issue off for another. We've got to try and do both. And the other issue, of course, is getting ready for next financial year and what that means for all of us and for our patients and citizens. So we've got to start to think about what those planning challenges are, the financial challenges and the service delivery challenges, with all the things that we're about to hear probably that will come out of the Chancellor's statement and whatever else that flows from that. So as we go through this, if you feel that we're not looking to the future enough as well as the here and now, will you help us pick that up and help us plan so that we don't get into January and February and we've traded one issue for another? Is that okay? Sorry, Rachel.
Thank you. I just wanted to obviously ask about the contingencies for the strike action, which you did mention in your report, but
yes.
Just a brief sort of, how would that process be responded to as a system, given the RCN's announcement? Thank you.
Patrick.
Yeah, I was going to pick this up in the Chief Exec's report, but obviously we would acknowledge the result of the national ballots yesterday. Just to say that those ballots are being held at organisational level, and there's a varying picture that people will have picked up from the media about the extent of impact. My reading of the local outcomes were that CFT and RCHT, the ballots did meet the required numbers in terms of turnout. So the next step would be for the RCN to be writing to respective chief executives to be setting out their plans. The Chief Exec's report later on this agenda refers to a system level meeting that took place with the trade unions on the 26th of October, not to replace or cut across the mechanisms at organisational level, which is where that work would be, the detail of the action and the mitigation would be managed. But we did want to make sure we had lines of communication with trade unions about overall impact. And I think it's fair to say in that conversation, a joint commitment to be minimising the impact of action on patient care. But it was a respectful meeting that kind of respected both parties' rights and obligations through that period. So that dialogue will continue, and we'll be able to update when there's more information about what form, length, duration that action is expected to take.
Just to say, I was just talking to Susan about it. My understanding is that the independent sector nurses were not balloted. However, some of them may not have changed their place of work. If they look as if they work for the NHS, they will have been balloted. The independent sector not being balloted. I've had a conversation with Cornwall Council about whether or not our gut feeling was that people might strike within the independent sector, and I'm afraid it's very difficult to quantify. I haven't positively heard that anybody will be, but there will be CQC implications if there aren't nurses to work every shift.
Thank you. Steve?
Yeah, thank you. Just to... So you can turn your mic.
You just speak. Okay.
Sorry. Just to add to Patrick's update, then the majority of trusts across southwest England, provider trusts, and the majority of ICBs reached the threshold for industrial action. As Patrick said, that includes Royal Cornwall Hospitals NHS Trust, it includes Cornwall Partnerships NHS Foundation Trust, it also includes Derriford UHP, and organisations broadly across the southwest. We can expect to have 2 weeks' notice at least of industrial action, but we don't have any definitive dates for industrial action at this point. And just to add a bit more context, there's been, I think, absolute clarity from RCN that this will not impact on emergency care. It will, however, likely impact on other aspects of care, and we've been managing that really closely, and we'll be updating as providers, patients at the earliest opportunity if there is to be any impact. The potential impacts could include a reduction in elective activity from an outpatient's perspective and a procedural perspective, and of course we'd only do that if there is no other option for us, but I think we do need to be ready for industrial action of that nature. The industrial action with RCN is triggered for provider organisations and ICBs. It doesn't include, for example, community interest companies or other parts of the system who might be delivering services. It is specific, and there's a published list of those trusts and integrated care boards that are impacted. Regional resilience groups are being established, and as Patrick has briefly touched on, there's been a comprehensive level of planning and contingency planning for these matters. Just looking a little bit further ahead though, John, we would also anticipate, I think, Unison, GMB and Unite ballot outcomes to become clear towards the end of November, and that they also could have implications on parts of services provided across the region. So we'd need to update on that at future meetings as well.
Harry, did you want to add something? No, fine, thank you. Patrick?
Steve's rightly picked up, there's a round of ballots underway with other health and care unions. I did want to flag as well that school staff ballots are also happening, which could have an indirect effect in the same period. So another thing to report back to a future meeting.
Tim?
Yeah, thank you. And just to confirm what Steve said with regards to Unison and GMB, that those are unions with which paramedics and other ambulance care staff work for. So again, lots of sector contingencies, and I know we're working with the region and others in terms of actions following any outcome that may come from a ballot.
Thank you very much. Mario.
Let's say it again. Whilst there is a lot of public sympathy and support for this action, people who are going through a process will be nervous about that. So I think it's really important, again, that good public advice and guidance is given by the appropriate section, whether it's the trust themselves or the ICB.
I'll pick this up in the CIO's report in
Yeah.
so much as the functions of the System Coordination Centre and what we're doing around industrial action.
Okay, let's move on, colleagues. All right, thank you for raising that. So let's move to the Chief Exec's update, which, Susan, you're going to cover off.
I will do, thank you. As Chair said, we'll take the report as read. However, I would just like to draw your attention to a couple of points. Some good news, we continue to be top of the pile in terms of our autumn COVID booster, incredibly important for our population, because this will be one of the areas that will help to reduce some of those demands into our front door. So, okay, thank you. Just repeating, we remain at the top of the league in terms of our autumn COVID booster programme. So a huge amount of work that's gone on, and the benefits for that for us will be less demand, I hope, to our acute trust and other services. The other area I'd just like to talk about, and we've already mentioned it, is we've set up our System Coordination Centre. This was a mandate that came from NHS England a matter of weeks ago, and as an ICB we now have new duties under the Civil Contingency Act. We're a Category 1 responder, so we are expected to have an incident command centre. So having the System Control Centre gives us that early start should we go into an incident. And in relation to the industrial action, we have an industrial action cell set up. What we're waiting for is, as we've already discussed, and I won't repeat, is some more of the information that needs to come out. And Mario will pick up communications out, because I think you're absolutely right. We're still not fully au fait at the moment with the derogations that RCN will talk about in terms of which services will be preserved and which services then, as as an ICB we can start to bolster, which would include Mary's point around care homes, because we can't see any of our services fail. But those are those conversations that we'll have through the System Coordination Centre. I think I'd just also like to draw attention to the work that continues within the ICB around the governance arrangements. We're continuing to work with PricewaterhouseCoopers. That's due to be completed mid this month, and we can report back at a further stage.
Did you want to talk about the external review of our SCC?
Apologies, I will do. We had a national visit that came both to RCHT and to our community trust. They also visited the national lead for data, part of Pauline Phillips' team, who's the national lead for urgent emergency care, visited our system control centre, was very impressed, said we were much further ahead than many other ICBs in the country, and in fact said that the Secretary of State was looking to visit some of the SCCs and he would be putting us forward in Cornwall. So I just wanted to feed that back. I think it's really positive news for all of the efforts that we've done as a collective system. Thank you.
Isn't that fantastic? Absolutely. Nothing like being an exemplar, is there really? Okay, well done everybody. Any other questions on that update? No? Okay, so let's move on. So we're into item 7 now. We've got strategic priorities and system priority flow update. So we did have Kate down, but Carolyn, you're going to step in and tackle that. So over to you, please, on strategic priorities.
Okay, thank you. Hello, everyone. Nice to see you all here today. The paper that you've had before you is around our strategic objectives. And I think hopefully this will pick up on John's point about looking to the future. The paper is there to provide a summary of our kind of integrated care system, vision, aims, and our 5 strategic priorities. And really, it's just confirming that as an integrated care system, as an integrated care board, and an integrated care partnership, that the 5 areas that we've identified as the true north priorities are the things that we are going to deliver via our integrated care strategy, which is currently in development with our integrated care partnership, and recognising that the 5 clinical priorities and the 3 enabling priorities that we've got for our operational planning for 22-23 will all form part of that. So it's also recognising, and I think this picks up on some of the points that came out in the board meeting in October, around the clarity of the Transforming Care for Cornwall group will coordinate this work, but it will report to the system executive group to be able to maintain the oversight and assurance. And I think the things I'd like to draw out of the paper really is that there's a very handy little diagram if people are struggling to work out how it all fits together, around the integrated care strategy, and that being our long-term view over kind of 10 years, looking at our ambitions and how we would want things to be different at that point. Our joint forward plan, which is owned by the NHS and the trusts, and then obviously our system planning returns, which are our historic operational plans that we have to put in on a yearly basis. And I think there's quite a few people in the room here who were actually at the True North event, so hopefully you'll recognise some of the pictures and some of the statements that are in there, because these are the things that as a collective of probably 75 to 80 people in the room over 2 days, we actually agreed these were the important things for us and that we would come back to them when we needed reminding why we were here. So I think it's just reflecting, because I don't believe that we've actually got an audit trail that we collectively agree that these are the 5 strategic priorities that our integrated care system will work towards, and they will be recognised across the board, the integrated care system and the integrated care partnership. I would just say that one of the recommendations is about sharing this. So I think there's some work to do with the comms teams around this particular little bit, because obviously the opening statement is the leadership team, but actually we are all it. Every single one of us are the integrated care system. So if we are aiming to release this to staff, we need to make sure that staff recognise themselves in it. And I think there's a few language changes that we might want to make to when we release it to all staff. But one of the recommendations obviously we'll come to is about how we do that collectively through the comms teams. And I think, again, the slides that you will have seen at the back around the operational priorities and then the individual ones, these slides were slides that went to the Health Overview and Scrutiny Committee a couple of months ago. So again, colleagues who attend that will recognise it. But again, I think there's a little bit of work that collectively we need to kind of clarify in there, because we were asked by the Overview and Scrutiny Committee for our top 3 things. So again, I think there's a bit of work to be done there. But this is really where we now need to be landing so that we can tell our story across our system. So I think those are the things that I really wanted to highlight, Chair, and then obviously just get the recommendations.
For sure. So I think it's interesting, as before we jump to the recommendations, we'll have a little discussion around it. I do think we agreed last time the 5 priorities and the 3 enablers. So I think that, but the language being used here is to reaffirm this. Lots of things are bumping and changing and that kind of thing. Sometimes you just need to sort of, this is it again. Because then the effort will go into the communications bit of that. So does anybody want to talk about the paper more generally before we dive into the recommendations? Sanj?
Question on transforming care for Cornwall. You said it would be accountable to the SEG. Currently the document refers to it being accountable to the ICB. Do we need to change that?
You'll see the line to the side, so we will change that governance arrangement, but it will come into the system executive group.
Okay.
And be accountable.
Later on, Sanj, there is actually a slide that explains all that weaving. So if this hasn't quite picked it up, later on when we get to the governance-y bit, I'm hoping it pick that up then. Is that okay?
Yeah.
And sorry, can I just add into that? They obviously picking up Sanj's point from the governance perspective. The other importance around picking up these strategic priorities is that as an integrated care board, we need to have these written into our board assurance framework, and we've made an assumption that that's what we're working with, because in many meetings we've collectively been talking about the True North priorities. Yeah. So again, it's just that reconfirming.
Thank you, Karen. Thank you for that, because yes, Martin.
Thanks. Yeah, I think it's a great paper, and I actually like the fact we're revisiting the True North priorities and just trying to reflect those now in our strategic objectives, because it felt like a bit of a time ago now, so it's nice to revisit that and think, great, we are using that to focus our efforts. I like the way the strategic priorities have been reflected in the strategic objectives, so we can start to flesh those out a bit in actually what we're going to do to achieve them. When I look at the purposes of the ICS, I sort of ticked each of those 4 off, and I can see where they're flowing into the priorities, except for one gets a little bit lost, which is the help the NHS support the broader social and economic development. And I think that's sort of gone a little bit into workforce, but the workforce one focuses mainly now on, fulfilling our workforce obligations and making sure we develop our people. So when we flesh it out a bit more, I just don't want to lose that little bit of economic and social development angle, which I think may have got slightly lost in that strategic objective, if you don't mind me saying so.
That's really helpful.
Okay. Any other points before we get into the recommendations? No. Okay, so I won't read them out. Can we just deal with the first 3? Are you happy with the first 3? Yeah. Thank you very much. Now on the communications one, just on that one, how might this not become the best kept secret in town? What is the plan to share this with people, just before we get into the recommendation?
So the plan is to work with the communications teams and the senior leads in each of the organisations to agree the language, because there's some of the words in here we would probably want to change if you were putting it out to the general, to our staff in general, and also this will be in the public domain. So I think we need to keep the objectives there, but we need to use language that people recognise but that don't lose the message. What we've taken for here so far is the outputs from the facilitators packs that most people have had. But as I say, there's a bit of tweaking here that we probably need to do to simplify the language.
When might it start being shared with a wider?
So I would like to do that over the next couple of weeks, Chair, so that we can share
Everybody happy with
something kind of before Christmas.
That's what I'm trying to tease out, really. Is everybody supportive of that? Get on and do it quicker.
Because I think people need to understand.
I think so. I think so. So you've got the support to crack on, do it sooner, and do it collectively.
Thank you very much.
Done. So recommendation 4 accepted. Lovely. That's that paper. Thank you very much, everyone. So the system priority flow update. That's going to be Susan.
It's me. Thank you, Chair. And it follows on obviously from Carolyn's paper and update. This is one of our strategic objectives, flow. We were asked to bring it to board quite rightly because of the issues as well around our ambulance handover delays. This paper is in part how we address that and the flow through our system. This is about being able to see that shift of our patients and our people through our systems from left to right in the most basic terms and how we're doing that. What you have in front of you is the paper, the rationale for what we're doing, and also the mandate. This is the programme management process that we are now following. What the mandate will show is the interdependencies are incredibly important with the other strategic priorities that we've picked. So we know that flow is almost a canary in the mine, if you like. So if we get our strategic programmes correct, our flow will work. But equally, if flow works, we have all of our patients who are waiting on waiting lists for their treatments. So being able to get people to flow through our systems efficiently and quickly, we start to address the backlog of people that are waiting for treatments within our system. So it's an incredibly important piece of work. What you have in front is the mandate. We will follow project management processes. So if we are happy to sign the mandate off today, the next piece of work we'll do is the resource plan. So I do think it's worth pointing out here the resources that will be required going into each of these programmes are not to be underestimated, and this is where we come together as a system and how we share our resources to bring this work together and to bring it together quickly. So I do want to make that point, and then once we've done the resource plan, we'll go on to the fuller project implementation document, which will all be taken through the Transforming Care for Cornwall programme board. I'm happy to take any questions before we go to the recommendations.
Any questions? Steve?
Yeah, strongly support the paper. There is Sanjay's question from earlier on about the governance aspect. So the slide showing the governance arrangements, it is showing a move away from Transforming Care for Cornwall being overseen by SEG to not being overseen by SEG. So it'd be helpful if we can just clarify that. I think it was slide 15.
So, sorry, I thought somebody else was going to speak.
Yeah, no, you
with me. Okay, so I think it's really important that we're taking updates. We've been asked to take updates, Steve, through our system executive group on each of the programmes. I think there needs to be. We can talk as an executive how we take those updates through SEG that come out of the Transforming for Cornwall Care Board.
So I can possibly help cover a lot of these questions because they're going to come up constantly, I suspect, this morning. In part 2, the paper that actually refers to ICB and ICS meeting structures is exactly where the team have actually pulled together what I call the wiring diagram of some of this governance stuff and who sits on what committees and that kind of thing. So I'm hoping that will help give that clarity, Steve, as well.
Sorry. Well, I'm just mindful of the conversation we've just had, though, where Caroline was outlining that Transforming Care for Cornwall would be overseen by SEG, and this paper is showing a different presentation of that. Unless I misunderstood, I think Caroline in the previous item was saying that a system executive group would oversee Transforming Care for Cornwall, which is what is shown in slide 15 in the current arrangements, but what's also showed in slide 15 is an intended change as part of these recommendations to move away from that.
Page 14.
Oh, sorry.
Page 14.
Got the old structure on the left and the structure on the right.
That one.
I tell you what we're going to do is, can we pick this up in the wider, because later on there's a whole slide deck of governance, and if we've not quite joined up the dots. Well spotted. But let's capture your point and Sanjay's point and make sure we capture them in that part two. Is that okay with you?
Yeah, very happy.
Is Sanjay okay with that? Neil, you wanted to ask a question?
Yeah, thank you, John. On page 14 again, I can see five purple boxes, and the fourth one states enabling the development of integrated delivery across our ICAs. Very much a purpose, and in terms of prevention of admission, a very important part of what we do. I just wondered whether there needed to be more clarity of the linking in of the ICA working within the governance structure. I couldn't really see any in terms of our MD roles and place leadership.
So at the moment, Neil, what we're pulling together. So there's been an awful lot of work that's been done around flow, but I think it's fair to say it's been done in isolation of each of the organisations. They've done a huge amount of work. In pulling that together, you're absolutely right. We need to form the groups that sit below each of the. They're being called buckets. It's not a phrase I particularly like, but within each of those, there's meeting groups that sit with, and that's the work that we will do collectively as an executive to ensure that we've got the right membership, because the programme board for flow, what the discussion that I had yesterday, we've been working with Prism, is what we don't want is a programme board that's so big we're not able to make any decisions. We need the responsible officers from each of those buckets that will have their meetings to feed into the overall programme board. And I think you're absolutely right, we still need to be we're fleshing out all of that membership at this point in time. And I will go back to the point that the resource required for this and the other 5 strategic priorities are not to be underestimated. And what we don't want, Neil, and this is a point for everybody, is we don't want everybody sitting in endless meetings around our strategic objectives. We need to be really clear how we do this in a lean and efficient way where we get on with the doing and not meeting consistently.
So Steve, you might be able to cover a little bit I'm just looking towards the papers at part 2. I don't think it's overly secret, this bit. And what it's showing there is these, we're going to call them priority groups, by the way. These priority groups, they do actually report into, at one level, into SEG, from Transforming Care group into SEG, but it also shows a line into the relevant ICB committees, and it also shows a line directly into here via Transforming Care for Cornwall. So it's scrutinised at various places, but as an executive group, a lot of the things that you need to do in those priority groups needs to work across the system, which is why it needs a relationship with SEG. But we can pick that out. It's in the documentation. I think it's pretty well trailed, and certainly it's been discussed with Price Waterhouse, but we'll pick that up if you don't feel happy. Is that okay with you?
Yeah, no, that's absolutely
Karen,
fine.
is that fair? Yeah, fine. Andy?
I suspect it's going to be covered off by that, but I am just a bit struck by slide 17. The community transformation portfolio is currently unpopulated. And obviously that fits very neatly with my primary care partner portfolio and my ICA portfolio, and just be keen for that to be populated.
And we're going to carry 3 colleagues into the discussion in part 2. And Andy, please make sure you raise that as we get that. And Neil, please raise your point too, so we cover that off as well. I'm not kicking the can down the road. I think it's the right time to do it, if that's all right. Okay, any other points on this? If not, we'll move to the recommendations. Just before we do, just draw your attention. I may have done this last time, but I'll do it again here. If you look on page 3 of this, and then the third part of it, it says confirmation of governance routes. This is a classic example for me of where we're trying to get things going through SEG and that before they come to here. So this is going to, each paper has this little section in it, so you should start to get to see things that have been through the right processes. So when we get later on, the reason why I'm raising it now is we're learning by doing. So in some of the papers later on, because SEG meets once a fortnight kind of thing, there's an intervention window in between time when things will have been discussed more informally. We need to be faithful to some of the discussions there, but we're going to start adding addendums to it as we go through this to make sure that this is a live meeting that is capturing the latest updates, not just old updates. So I say that just in case I forget later on. But hopefully this will demonstrate to you this has gone through the SEG group and the Transforming Care for Care group, and therefore is supported. So the 4 recommendations, okay, the 4 recommendations are as read. And Steve, I'm really grateful on item 3 for your support under effectively sometimes setting things up. We've got to remember we've got to step certain things down as we're duplicating and doing whatever else. Is that this is the current UEC board is stood down and will be subsumed as part of that. I think that's a really important strategic point for us to grasp. So that can we accept those 4 recommendations, everyone? Everybody happy with that? Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, Susan. Right. So let's move on to, in fact, just again drawing to everyone's attention the agenda. You know, actually now, did you spot, it now says the top 5 clinical priorities, whereas last month it actually said top 6 because we changed it. So this is even aligning the agendas. How wonderful is that? Did you want to add something? No. Okay, so let's move on to the Cornwall Council update on NHS grants made in 2022, including the Section 256 earmarking funding update. Rachel.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everyone. Bringing a paper on myself and Ali Borman. Ali sends apologies today. She's on leave. I will take you through the paper. So essentially, I will take the paper as read, but what we've tried to do is articulate a breakdown of the funding allocations that were made in 2022 for NHS grants that includes our Section 256. It is worth saying at this point a number of these grants are multi-year, and I just want to make that point in terms of the overall allocations. We have been working since July in partnership with the local authority to also set up our formal governance arrangements to ensure that we monitor and oversee the grants, and that's through our integrated commissioning partnership group. We've been meeting since July and we are now in the rhythm of the formal reporting coming through and will be formally through our FPCC committee. The table on page 1 breaks down the number of allocations that make up the circa 32 million of grants that have been shared. As you can see within the paper, the main point that I wanted to highlight is the sheer range of interventions that we are funding through the grants. In particular, ones to highlight to the board have been the increase that we are making to the home care DPS ceiling rate. That was uplifted at the beginning of April 22. We have commissioned additional block bed home care capacity, although we are, it is fair to say, in some particular areas of the patch, we are struggling in terms of market provision and are looking at mitigations, both tactically and indeed through our commissioning approaches, where we have particular problems across the geography in the provider market. We have significantly increased our community equipment grant. We've seen increased demand in particular for our community equipment to support people home and helping people maintain in their own home with the right OT assessment and equipment. And as you heard about last time in our update around supporting our Pathway 1 discharges, in the summer we increased our community enablement capacity commissioned through Age UK and Peninsula Humans as part of our commitment to supporting those at home and also with their enablement to be supported quickly home from hospital. There is also a significant amount of investment with our voluntary sector, many of which you heard about last time, around our warm hubs and our community infrastructure and grants that is over a 3-year funding period, just to make that clear. And as you will see later on the agenda, our digital transformation programme, and particularly a major part of that is our surge replacement. In terms of going forward, Chair, we recognise in Appendix 1 what we've given is a full breakdown of each of the schemes and a short update in terms of the progress on each of those. What we will be receiving through FPCC, as agreed at the board, both the BCF and our Section 256s, is a full breakdown of any slippage and any mitigations that we've taken through as formal governance. I'm very happy for that to be included in the December report as part of our routine integrated performance report coming forward. The key recommendation to note is that when we meet as the partnership group at the end of the month, we will be working with SROs to confirm how those funds are working to those agreed purposes, the metrics in the same way that we operate against the BCF, and where we have any slippage, are mitigations to accelerate delivery or consider mitigations where those are off track. Thank you, Chair. I was going to leave my update and take any questions.
Mary.
Thank you very much. Thank you for this. It's really helpful, and it's nice to have that information. And so don't take this as any kind of criticism at all. I'm just hoping that the development of this and how we can consider it might move us into what some of the outcomes are from this expenditure. And at some point, as we mature, perhaps be able to correlate exactly where we're managing to take people out of some resources and put them into others. And I know that's a step further, but I really welcome this. I just suppose when I read it, I felt that little bit of, oh, and so what's happening with that? So can you tell me when you might expect to produce that sort of information? Thank you.
Yeah, Mary, that's a perfectly reasonable bit of feedback. So certainly that's what Rachel Rotherow and I have sought from the operational group to come to the ICPG next month. There is something about, we'll have month 6 report at that point in terms of where we are, but also we'll have fully articulated in terms of those outcomes that we expect to see. An example of that, if you take the first item where we know that we've contracted some of our home care blocks, we have struggled in terms of some of that capacity in the north of east. Now actually that can be correlated then back in terms of where some of our hotspots are in terms of our P1 and our P2 delays. So I think, you know, taking that feedback, doing that triangulation, we would expect that to be in December's report.
That's really helpful, thank you. And I'm just wondering where ICPG relates. I'm sorry, I haven't quite got the governance picture in my head, but how does that? So for the how do we hear about that?
So for the ICB, formally is a subcommittee of our Finance Performance Committee. So that's the governance route through. Obviously, the council will have its reporting through into cabinet in the same way we're managing that as a dual fund.
Thank you.
Very, very helpful. I'll certainly echo the Mary's comments about the welcoming this information and support the request for kind of further information going forward. Particularly being able to understand the impact that these individual schemes have on increasing capacity, improving flow, and translating into it from an NHS provider perspective, particularly into reducing ambulance delays. There are a number of these schemes that are still under development or aren't necessarily progressing to the timeline I guess I had envisaged earlier on. If we look at scheme 1B, Rapid Community Response, still under development, and gross payments being mobilised. So there's probably an immediate question about, are there any opportunities for us to be able to accelerate those schemes so that we can have an earlier impact, particularly going into the winter environment?
So Steve, that's exactly in terms of the recommendation of the report that we will be doing through ICPG, is taking that assessment in terms of where we can accelerate. Some of those will have a reasonable start time if we're talking about procurement in particular, so those will be some of the lead times that may be required for particular schemes, which obviously we have to follow due process, but we're having that full walkthrough in our November meeting, so I can capture that in those that we have been able to accelerate and where we've got other mitigations. It's worth recognising that this is obviously a package with the BCF commitment and the demand and capacity fundings that we have as a suite of things through winter in terms of our mobilisation.
Thank you. Sanj?
Thanks. I think it's really helpful, clear layout. Couple of questions. One is, in some of the boxes you can sort of see how we are spending against budget, and in others the information is more just a description of what that line is about. And is it possible to get that sort of consistent information? And the second point is, it would be good to understand where are we reporting against some lines which I don't see in the appendix, such as voluntary sector development, 3 million. Is that going to be in a subsequent more detailed report that you've referred to that's going to ICPG?
Yeah.
No, a separate question.
So in terms of the voluntary sector development, we actually oversee those schemes in particular through the ICA committee because of the interrelationship with PLACE. But for completion, because it's going through FPCC, it will be detailed in the round because that's all of our commitments in terms of this year and going forward. So you'll see the full suite there. In terms of those where there is the level of detail, I think that's a fair point in terms of what we've pulled through from the initial paper from PG, and we'll also recognise that some of these are multi-year schemes in terms of the grants, so their start and end point. But very happy to take feedback in terms of the report that comes through December that meets everybody's requirements in terms of transparency for assurance, Chair.
Just before you comment, one of the things I'd like to collectively agree in a second is what do we want to see back in December? So you might want to ask more questions about this, but I think you might want to reflect also in a second on can Rachel and colleagues actually do this by December and manage expectations, because there's a bit about managing everybody's expectations in timeline. Does that work for you, Steve, if we move on to what we might expect, or do you want to make another point now?
Happy to comment on that as well. If you don't mind though, John, my understanding is this funding was transferred in March this year. It's now November, and a number of these schemes are not yet delivering, and that does give me some cause for concern. And Rachel, I don't disagree with providing a report back in December, but that's then going to be 9 months after the funding was transitioned. And what we see from a provider perspective in CFT and RCHT particularly is an increasing number of P1 patients and P3 patients awaiting discharge. Some of the schemes in here should have the effect of directly impacting on that, so that there is an urgency, and has been for some time. And whilst I'm grateful to see this report coming forward, it's not providing the level of detail or the assurance that I think we need. In terms of the second part about what should we see back in December, I would like to see that detail, and also what that is going to translate to into a reducing number of patients occupying hospital beds, whether that be CFT, RCHT or UHP, because we know those things directly translate into improved ambulance performance. So my request would be that the clarity, the detail of the schemes, but also the impact they have on capacity and
let's
progression.
work that through together in a second, because when I made that cryptic remark earlier on about minuting rather than the discussions, I think this particular time we need to actually minute really clearly your expectations, and can Rachel and colleagues deliver that? Or if not, please be honest with us and say, we can't do that, but when can you do that? Because if we can minute that and everybody's happy with it from today, then we know what we're expecting back. I think this particular paper and a few others about managing expectations, particularly after you've, actually to be fair to you, you've been raising consistently since the start of the ICB. All right?
If I could just come back though on some of the schemes delivering, Steve, because I think a number of them are without the enablement capacity that we've been commissioned through this in the summer in terms of Humans and Age UK. We wouldn't have had the impact on our P1 numbers in the way that we have. Our community equipment is absolutely about supporting people home and keeping people at home. So I think that I wouldn't want to make a broad statement about that, because I would hope with what we bring back, and in terms of articulating the back in terms of what started, what numbers have been delivered, where we've got slippage, I take the point in you seeing that more transparently, but I wouldn't want to take away from here that those things aren't having an impact, because they clearly are.
Rachel? Sorry,
Jimmy Rachel's.
Yes,
thank you. I just wanted to sort of comment on, I think, the positive partnership working around this, and the just sort of joint governance arrangements that we've got across both sort of organisations in Element, and how that's working. So obviously the board here have received a report from Rachel, but there is a process that a grant has gone to the council for the delivery of this, which that would have transferred back to NHS England. So the board, I don't think the board here has a purpose to scrutinise as such the sort of operations of the council, but it's a partnership approach in order for us to clearly have that view of the system, which I think Rachel's articulated well some of the benefits. But clearly that there is a difference here, but I think in view of the joint working, it's going really positively, and are certainly part of that Section 256 delivery that I oversee. We'll have logic models, we'll have metrics, and I'm sharing them through a whole range of committees, the progress over the next 3 years for that, and I would expect my officers to be doing something similar, but really positive impact to date. And given that, as Rachel said, the governance structures weren't put in place until July, but the work was done on the hoof, I think there is some really good progress.
So I just need to get other people's views on your comment there about it's not this board's responsibility to scrutinise this. So could I just ask our ICB Audit Chair, what is your perspective on the need to scrutinise £33 million worth of CCG money that was...
Well, on one level I completely agree. It's not our job here to scrutinise the council, but what our job here is to scrutinise our executive. So we are in effect scrutinising our executive to say, you know, we've authorised you to make this grant, spend this money. Can you please come back, executive, give us assurance about the value for money, the delivery and the impact? And I do think that's appropriate. It's not the council here we're scrutinising.
Quite right, because it was more than the council, to be fair, that actually got the money too, to be fair, which is why Emma, for example, we've been copying me on most of this. So, Mary, again, this is another critical point when we get into part 2, if we may, about how that IPCB, no, too many acronyms.
I know.
All right. I've seen in some of the correspondence that its main line is into the ICP. I personally would challenge that, but let's pick that up as part of the part 2 conversation, because we are working our way through this, everyone. I mean, it's something so different that we shouldn't beat ourselves up about it. But when these things happen, we've just got to be calm and collective and agree a way forward. Is that okay with everyone? So I'm going to actually reach out now and make an apology and a thank you. So apologies to Rachel, because I got the papers to read in advance, and for some reason I didn't get the appendix that came with it. So I actually read it up to page 3. So having now seen page 4, 5 and 6, I feel slightly more relaxed. So apologies, but thank you. All right. But also thank you for agreeing to actually come back in December. So I'd like to spend the next few minutes, if that's all right with you, and Steve, actually now agreeing the language we want to put into the minutes as to a joint expectation as to what we expect back. Because to me, managing people's expectations now on this kind of thing actually trumps almost the content in some ways, because at least we can actually collectively agree. So who would like to go first? I could throw out 3 or 4 ideas, but who would like to go first as to what they might want to see next month? Neil?
Thank you, Chair. This isn't an issue of scrutiny of the council or even the executive, but for people working across lots of these issues, including at place, it would certainly be helpful for each of the schemes to have the years proposed against them, number of years.
Lee, what would you like to articulate as to what, as you're kind enough to raise this since the start of the ICB, what would meet your requirements by December? And let's see if the team can come back with that.
I'd suggest 2 things, John. Firstly, what do these individual schemes translate to into specific additional capacity in the community that would support discharge of patients who are no longer required to be in hospital? That's the first thing. The second thing is there's a paper going to SEG tomorrow which sets out a trajectory through to March next year of improved ambulance performance, and that is directly dependent on a whole range of actions, one of which is community capacity to support the discharge of patients from hospital into the community. So the second thing, I think, is the assurance that these schemes plus the existing programmes that are underway deliver that trajectory. And that trajectory could form part of reporting back to ICB as well as to SEG. So I think the second thing is the alignment of that increased capacity enabled through these schemes to that trajectory of overarching performance improvement.
I have to press have to press the button this time. I think it would be really helpful to be clear about which schemes are providing additional, and that would be really helpful. So I think it's really exciting looking at the suite of opportunities here in terms of across the age range, children and young people. There's something there for older adults, around several schemes to support dementia and so on. And I know those things are really important to local communities. So for me, there's something about community capacity to support emission avoidance, and then community capacity to support earlier discharge or prompt discharge. That would be really helpful. And then there may well be other things that are about supporting the overall objective of keeping people healthier longer at home, which may be a more generic opportunity. So that would help. I think it would also help our places. So having now attended the West, it's now called the Integrated Transfer of Care Hub, but that is now a place in action, and I can see the presence, I could touch and feel the presence of Humans of the Peninsula, Age UK, Volunteer Cornwall and others, actually all working to keep people at home, provide greater support to those that are at risk of admission, and also grappling with the challenges of discharge, which I still think what we've done is great, but I think what we need is even more capacity than we've already had up to date. So this is very, very welcome, and I hope those contributions are a helpful steer.
Before I try and wrap up, any other thoughts? Most of you know me well now. I try and triangulate most of what I hear with others. So a bit of feedback. I have to say the feedback I've had has been that Rachel, you and your colleagues, Emma, you and your colleagues, Al, who's not here today, who's on holiday, and Rachel from the council, it is coming back to me that it's really strong collaborative work is going on. Really strong, and not just tokenistic, really strong. I can see you nodding, so for people not on who are on the screen, I thought I'd just say it's nodding, because we should value that and not let go of that. But I just wanted to capture what I thought, what I've heard, just making some notes, what might be things that, trying to hear Steve and Debbie and others who have fed in beforehand, what it might be that you're asking to come back. So what I'd summarised as the degree to which the grants have been spent year to date for each of them. On what? I think we're getting a bit of clarity on that. What impact by when? That's, I think, Steve's your point as to what you were having. And then, if you think about it, what is there then left to deliver over what time frame? Because if these are 3-year grants, we've got to be really quite clear. Are we talking about year 2.5? When actually you've got some colleagues in the room hoping it's in like week 2.5. So again, this is about managing expectations again. So is that a fair ask as well? Debbie, are you happy with that summary? Others happy? So I can see nodding.
John, can I just...
Sorry, I couldn't see that. Yeah.
Can I just add here? One of the things we're going to need to be careful about in the community is how much we process data with people. That the benefits of working in the community are that people engage with organisations because they're trusted. And what they don't want to be able to have to do is to give their inside leg measurement at every opportunity. Okay, so we are going to have learn from some of the things that we have from some of the comp funding through the council, for example, with the human learning systems, which won't necessarily measure whether somebody did or didn't get in an ambulance, or didn't necessarily measure exactly what happened when they came out of hospital. But there is a need for investment at that level that I think some of the grants are going towards, Emma, in the VCSE hub developments. So let's not over-process some of the data as well, please, within that.
Very good. Rachel?
My only comment was going to be aligned to that. Obviously, for some of the schemes, there is that more innovation and actually our personalisation outcomes, but we'll make that clear which of those schemes, Steve, are in that, because for that very reason we don't want stifling innovation. Actually, for some of these schemes, actually they're very personal to the individual around the impact for them and their lives. But I think that tallies very well with the report that we're going to take to ICPG. They'll be in different elements depending on the grant nature. We meet on the 28th of November, so I just wanted to check with my FPC chair. We'll run both of those reports in parallel through the governance so we can make the December timeline for this board, Chair.
Okay, so we're going to move to the recommendation. Maybe it's a different one now based on the ask we just had, but I'm going to be a bit picky here now, because I'm always really sensitive to when it says things like this ICP group will have oversight. It'll have executive oversight. There needs to be a scrutiny and assurance process that is really oversight as well, and that's what the ICB has set up in terms of its committees as well. I know there's also other councils, and I'm sure, Emma, when it goes into the community section, there'll be your own sovereign boards and that kind of thing. But can we just be careful of the language of oversight? Because it tends to normally actually be a scrutiny assurance process.
Yeah, I mean, just to clarify, we know that for FPCC and for the council equivalent, the assurance is done through that committee.
We'll take, actually, not so much the recommendation that's here, because I think we're broadly supportive of the direction of travel, but we'll take as the minute what we just talked about, which hopefully, Caroline, you and Sam can capture. Are you happy with that, everyone? Steve, I just need to look to you. Are you happy with where we're going in the direction of travel?
I think it's been a really useful discussion, and I think that helps us to move forward. So strongly support the summary and the steps that you've outlined.
Lovely.
Yes.
Thank you for Rachel, thank you to you and your teams, and pass on our thanks.
Very much
to,
a team effort.
I was going to say
Thank
pass on to the team, because I can sense we wouldn't be here without all partners' engagement on it. Okay, so let's move on to item 9, which is the joint forward plan for planning 23-24. Carolyn.
Okay, thank you. Again, I would just like to start this this item with, there's been a lot of effort from partners and colleagues into where we've got to so far with our planning. And this paper is setting out our approach for developing our planning and our full joint forward plan of what we've talked about previously. And it's asking us to just look at some principles that we want to apply when we're planning. For those of you that have been around for long enough, we do not want to be in the same situation that we were in last year. So therefore, we want to be forward-looking and forward-thinking. And actually, colleagues and partners around the table, we've already been doing quite a lot of work in the background around setting up the right planning groups and having the right people around the table, engaging together, not working in silos around activity, workforce and finance, pulling people together so that we're sitting in the same room having the same conversations, which has proved immensely helpful right from day one. So effectively what this paper is asking is that colleagues confirm their support to the proposed approach for developing our planning for 23-24 and recognising that that plays into our joint forward plan as we've already articulated. The things that I'd kind of like to bring to people's attention is really the time frames that are so important in this. There's a lot of milestones that we kind of have to hit to make sure that we are not scrabbling around at the last minute. I think really the bits I would bring people's attention to are the appendices. So just pulling out the fact that, you know, our approach to planning as an ICS, take a population health management and values-based approach. We've got a mandate to deliver as an ICS population health and embed it and use the data and the evidence to support how we deliver services as we go forward. So it's really, really important. Again, you know, this is a big piece of work that if we're going to do it properly, which we are trying to do it properly, means that people collectively work together and see the importance of meetings and how we come together to talk about it. And I think the real one that I want to bring to people's attention is Appendix 6. This looks really detailed, but it's had to be really detailed because it really needed to break down, you know, I know John's really keen about the by when and what dates, but this really breaks down where we need to take things to, at what point, and where different boards will receive those papers, you know, and how the system executive will see it, where our gateway points are for this whole process. So it's really recognising that, you know, we have a lot of work to do in a very short period of time. Colleagues from around the table and partners who are already involved in this are really, really supportive and really putting in a lot of time and effort. So as you can see from the detailed Appendix 6, it takes us right through until March. Points out the timeframes of when particular committees and meetings are, and so I would just really value people just recognising the time and that is rapidly counting down and the effort that we need to put in, and again supporting the work to date and then supporting the work as we go forward. It's so important that we get this right, because it is so intrinsically linked with the joint forward plan and then the integrated care strategy and all of the things that we want to do, looking at across the operational plans, the 5 priorities and the enabling priorities. They all need to be intrinsically linked into our forward view, and we need to not just be thinking about 23-24, we really need to be thinking 24-25 as well. So open to questions on the paper if anybody has any. But I think there's some really helpful pointers and diagrams in here that will helpfully give people a good understanding of what the ask is.
Excellent, thank you.
Thank you, Caroline. Can I just add to that, because we've been having lots of discussions about the operational plan and learning from the lessons of last year, we're very keen, and I drift into optimism here, that we get to a point that we at least have a draft outline operational plan for the system by prior to Christmas. So we've got a picture to work with, and we've got time to resolve the position whether we're at any level, whether it's workforce, resource or service change. So what we're trying to do, and we'll be issuing early next week, is a detailed timeline that lifts out the bits that are required for the operational plan, because we're conscious a lot of the work around the development of a strategy won't necessarily be ready in time to inform next year. So I was just going to underline that. Also to add, we've already, my finance colleagues have already met yesterday to look at what the recurring position looks like for 23-24, and I got a wider discussion on that tomorrow to run through what the baseline position from a financial activity perspective looks like. So we got something to work with and share through SEG and the various meetings between now and Christmas. So I was just keen to underline the fact that I want to bring with colleagues to the surface real visibility of what next year looks like, and anticipate the national guidance rather than wait for it to appear before Christmas in a way that we never quite see it. So it was just to underline that and be keen to iterate that through the various committees we have and meetings over the next few weeks. Thank you.
Rachel?
Just a comment really in terms of how we approach it as a system. I think there's, as we get into our first year of ICB, being able to make the shift in this round to actually how we collectively develop the plan and the operating plan, rather than the old school where a commissioning lead would lead on that and obviously set that out as a mandate. I would really hope and would ask us in the spirit of that people are comfortable that this is genuinely a collective around the themes of those priorities. That means actually it's a view on the needs for the people, regardless, and being organisation agnostic in how we do it. And I think that would be a really powerful shift as an ICB and a really good cultural step in terms of our ICB approach.
Just wondered where the ICAs were in relation to the planning, the financial planning principles particularly, because I know the organisations themselves are highlighted as part of the sign-off process, and I'm not suggesting they should be, but I think sight of spend and plans would be really helpful. It's certainly with the work that we're doing, the voluntary sector, that's where we're taking a lot of our work, because actually we need to make sure that we're not duplicating effort and plugging the gaps that we need at place.
I'll respond to that. So you're quite right, and a colleague of mine, Mark Lish, who's sort of operational director of finance, is working closely with the ICAs to be a lot clearer about what the process is to tie the two things together for next year and bring in the locality perspective. So keep asking the question, but hopefully you'll get visibility of it over the next few weeks. Thank you.
Thank you. So it goes without I want to echo what Rachel said about just trying to take a different approach. And to be fair, we did try that in Devon last year, which was a bit bumpy, to say the least. But one of the things I just want to say, we just need to make sure that we link up, so we've got a sort of a join up, or at least sharing what we're both doing. And so my new Director of Finance started this week, Bill Shields, who I know a number of you know. He's going to be leading this, but also working with Anthony Fitzgerald, who's my Director of Delivery, and Simon Tapley as well. So I'll make sure we link across.
If you want to consider, because I know you obviously sit on ours and Rachel, Kate sits on the Devon board, as to whether you want to have a bit of space maybe on ours to sort of share some of your thinking, and maybe we could do the same for Kate on yours. But I mean,
that'd be good.
Have a think about that, about creating some sharing moments.
No, that's fine. And the last thing I would just say, I mean, the timelines are punishing, aren't they? And I was hoping that there might have been some shift, but no, sadly nothing appears to have popped out of that system. So we carry on.
Simon, Steve.
Yeah, I'd certainly agree with the timelines being very, very, very challenging. I think it's a really helpful paper, very clear and useful to start aligning provider organisation board meetings with ICB and SEG. So I'm grateful for that. Just Simon, on your comment about the national guidance, clearly that has a material kind of bearing on this, and we don't know when that's going to come out, and it might be
Who knows?
Christmas Eve would be.
That's normal, isn't it?
We don't know, but I mentioned that because in terms of a SEG paper from earlier in December going forward to boards, I'm sure that's absolutely appropriate, but we'll need to work really rapidly to update that with the NHS National Planning Guidance when that comes out, and I do expect it's going to be towards the end of December. Of course, the other kind of key point is next week's fiscal statement, and that might give us more context going forward. The question I had was just to test my understanding of how the social care element of council's budgetary planning fits into this process, firstly, and secondly, the BCF planning process as well, because both of those things clearly would have an impact from a system perspective. So they may already be absolutely entwined and aligned with the planning process, but I couldn't see that at this stage.
So, as you know, obviously the local authority financial years are very different from ours. They do all of their planning. We do need to have those conversations, particularly around the kind of adult social care elements, and because obviously there are alignments that we probably need to consider around the money that's being spent with the local authority and adult social care and whether there's any gaps or not. There was a really helpful conversation in a meeting that I was at yesterday about whether we could get some transparency around what the spends were and how we might work together. So Simon, that was something I was going to speak to you about today, about whether we could pick that up with our local authority finance colleagues to see what their position is from an open book perspective. The Better Care Fund, I'm going to defer to Rachel, if I may, because she's closer to that than I am.
Yeah. As always, Steve, it will depend on the alignment of the guidance coming out of DHCS in terms of that. But as far as possible, I think one of the things that we're trying to encourage through the work that we're doing as a partnership with our providers and indeed local authorities to start to build up what the pipeline of schemes may well be, and we would naturally, as we do with any financial allocation, will then need to prioritise in terms of what the unknown will be if the metrics change, that we may just need to build in some flex for how we do that. The timescales are often slightly later, so we will do our best to knit those together, and as we get any further updates we'll update through SEG.
When are you thinking about a Better Care Fund update for here?
So we agreed a quarterly update on this
when
year's
it's coming
scheme.
back.
I can't remember the top of my. We talked about it last month, so it would be January.
The reason why I'm trying to triangulate this in terms of when I did my sort of chair's intro, there's something about forward planning for 23-24, and for me there's got to be a moment, probably in January to be fair, by the sound of it, where Rachel wants to say something in a second, but because the councils are probably thick in the process of setting its preset discussions now and consultation, I would have thought. And if that's the case, we'll know by January. We'll know some of the fiscal issues that have come out. The NHS tends to be a bit slower in terms of being clearer on what its solutions are. But I think we won't be that far out. But if we can start to align maybe the work that's come out of the Section 256, the Better Care funding stuff, the fiscal stuff that's coming out, we'll be clear on where the council's policy is. We'll start to add those bits up. So maybe we have to think about, Simon, yourself and Carolyn and the team, thinking about how in January we have a first wash up on that. But Rachel, you wanted to add something?
Just to clarify the process of budget setting in the council. So the draft budget has been published and the cabinet will be considering that. It will then go out to consultation for then approval in February. So that's the sort of timescales of the council budgets, and there's sort of quite a level of transparency around those budgets that come through quarterly performance and finance reports as well that are published through the council's committee processes. So it is there. It's obviously the interrelationship in discussions of how that aligns that I know is going on, but just to clarify the time and the democratic accountability that we have to meet around that.
Okay.
It was just to say I wrote out to all the local authority leads in my patch, because there's been quite a lot of media release about some of the significant challenges. So I was going to organise to meet as a bit of a summit, just so we could be really clear, as Rachel says, that obviously there is the democratic process that needs to go through, but I suppose we want to avoid any unintended consequences of decisions, or at least have a partnership approach. So it would be helpful to also just to link in across with yourselves on that as well, because obviously just in relation to the border aspects, we want to make sure that we don't we're all fully sighted obviously of the challenges, but can also perhaps be able to help provide some of the opportunities as well.
Thank you. Caroline.
I just wanted to thank Councillor Kirkham, who's put a note into the chat basically saying, to echo a bit of Rachel's really, about Council's Cabinet met to propose their budget for next year yesterday, including roughly £29 million worth of savings in adult social care. The government has not announced any funding settlement yet, in case anybody hadn't seen that note in there. And then the only other thing that I kind of wanted to pull out from the paper obviously was around the delegated authority of the System Executive Group on the paper to determine the agreed timelines for the approval processes, because it is so tight, trying to delegate it down to the System Executive Group where a lot of us sit on it will make it a lot easier to actually manage the process and make sure that we meet the timelines.
Thank you. I know, Simon, you want to add something, but just on that question then that's been put in the chat, if it's £29 million for the savings in adult social care alone, are you able to articulate what impact that actually might have on health and care as a system? I mean, 29 million is a number, but what does it actually translate to in terms of what you're consulting on in terms of its impact?
So the process of any of the proposals within the budget has to go through a comprehensive impact assessment, which is known as the Cornwall Decision Wheel process, which is published as part of the consultation. So that is part of the assessment of any of the programmes of savings.
How do you get to find out
against that.
what savings the council's proposing in that 29 million?
That will be published as part of the budget consultation process,
okay.
and
that's not out yet.
Not because it's a draft budget for the cabinet to consider today, but the details will be published as part of the consultation when that's agreed to go out.
You know when
as
that
the
will
next
go
thing.
out?
The actual date the consultation will go out. I think it's December.
It's this year.
Yeah. Oh yes. Yeah. And it's for two and a half months or
factor
something.
I was just going to highlight a while ago, and Tracy and I both need to follow it up. We discussed aligning and sharing the information between our two organisations in terms of financial planning, and irrespective of the planning cycle, in terms of the content, there's always opportunity to deliver things in a different way and that might offer up better value. We both felt that was an opportunity, so it's a piece of work that I'll go away from this meeting to make sure we action pretty quickly, because we don't want to miss any opportunity for next year, do we, to work more closely.
No,
Thank you.
Happy to move to the recommendations, everyone. Yep, okay. So great piece of work, and you knew I'd like Appendix 6. Quite right too. So, thank you. But I've got a few questions on these recommendations just before I get there. Don't see much being pulled out in terms of the Clinical Prioritisation Advisory Group's advice in this process, probably because it hasn't been set up yet. So when are we getting a CPAG up and running is my first question. And my second one is, there doesn't seem much about an input from citizens into this process either. So how are we planning over this journey to actually get a robust input from residents?
So we would certainly be looking to take that through the Citizens Advisory Panel and then through the Citizens Engagement Committee to kind of get that voice. But we would also need to take a wider engagement piece. But as I say, we haven't got the detail of that yet, Chair.
Any view when we might have that back? Because this is taking us to March.
Yep. It'll
soon be Christmas, and then we'll be celebrating the 2nd of January pretty quickly.
So I'd like to think that we will be absolutely on it from the beginning of December when our new Head of Comms and Director of Engagement and Comms arrive. But it's not just around those two individuals and the ICB team. This is about engaging and across all of our partners' engagement as well.
And do we have a view on when CPAG will be up and running?
So we've set up the Clinical Advisory Group, which is feeding into the SCC at the request of the SRO for the SCC, and that's met 3 times. I would see that as the sort of starter of where we would be going in terms of setting up CPAG.
Thank you. Questions before we get to the recommendations. You mentioned data and evidence. Do we actually have one version of the truth? Have we got the same information that everyone's cited on and using?
I think we're getting there. I think the SCC is actually a demonstration that we've got information flows that are coming through that we can all look at, but there's more work to be done on it, and as we know, we are struggling to kind of meet all of our BI analytics and kind of we're through capacity, but
maybe we could pick that up later on in terms of the BI and capacity as a group.
Yep.
And just have a discussion, because there's nothing worse than having lots of data and all disagreeing with each other.
and that's why I made the point, Chair, that there's a huge amount of work to be done in a very short space of time, and while people are already quite engaged in it, it's on top of the day job.
I'm really excited on that. Okay, so the recommendations, I'm not going to read them out. I'm just going to ask you to consider the 4 of them, and by exception, are you happy to take them? In this case, I'll take silence as support. Lovely, thank you very much. That's all done. Thank you, Carolyn, for that.
Thank you, everyone.
Very good. So now we're moving on to more strategic conversations, the ICP strategy.
Thank you, Chair. We've almost come full circle, haven't we, in terms of where Carolyn started. So thank you, Carolyn, for some of the introduction on this paper, which I won't repeat. Just a few headlines for you. You'll be aware that we have a requirement in partnership with our integrated care partnership to publish a integrated care strategy. It is worth saying that there is a recognition that whilst this is a 10-year strategy, this very much in its first iteration will be an outline for ICBs, recognising the maturity of the partnership, recognising the infancy of us coming together in July and then meeting that requirement by December is quite a piece of work. The paper that you have gives a high-level overview from a paper that went to the Integrated Care Partnership at the end of September about the approach we're taking and the high-level milestones to deliver that draft outline by the end of December. Because a number of systems have reported back to the Department of Health and NHS England just the challenge with both getting a strategy through governance from both an ICB and a local authority perspective, or local authorities where there's more than one that cover an integrated care system. There is an understanding that what we produce in December won't have gone through the full endorsement. So we do have the months of January and December to complete that endorsement more fully, which I think is welcomed. I would also say at this point, because of some of the funding settlements, particularly for adult social care, still not known and won't be known till January, February time, that is really important in terms of the context of the underpinning financial work, both for the joint plan and the ICP strategy itself. One of the challenges that we've been working through in the same way that Carolyn's described for the 5-year joint plan is the governance steps prior to that draft publication by the end of December. So specifically what this paper is asking, that you will see a near final draft of that paper at the board in December, but we would like delegation through to the ICP committee that will meet a few weeks later to do the final endorsement, to be able to publish that draft, recognising it will come back in January, February through Cabinet and ICB for its full and proper endorsement. So that's the fundamentals of the paper, Chair.
Questions? So
It's worth saying there's a number of engagement opportunities through, say, integrated care boards, the SEG, our intermediate care and transforming care programme. So a number of you and your officer are engaged. It's built on the True North priorities that Carolyn discussed and some of the pre-public engagement that we've had on both the True North and our engagement in some of our population cohort areas. So I do think we're from a good starting place in terms of that overall outline.
We haven't had a refresh yet, have we, of the NHS long-term plan?
Can I respond to that, Chair?
Which one? That one?
The long-term
Oh,
plan
yeah, go
question.
for it,
So there won't be. So what they're looking to do now is that they're going to put any recommendations that they had in the long-term plan into the operational plan guidance that we will get. So the long-term plan will...
When do we get that operational guidance?
That's the $64 million question.
So I guess the reason why I was asking the question is how I know this is a rhetorical question, but how do they expect us to actually write a December ICP plan without any indication as to the operational needs of the NHS?
So there is some integrated care strategy guidance that has come out that loosely gives us some framework to work to.
Right.
And effectively what they have recognised is, again, it goes back to Jane's point earlier about tight timelines. Because a lot of this was supposed to have come out in advance, well in advance of this December submission, what they've recognised is that most people will be putting in an integrated care strategy that is effectively a set of statements with the ambition that will then be developed past December and beyond, because we haven't had a lot of the information and a lot of the things and tools to be able to pull that strategy together in
so it's
a
going
way.
to be pretty high level is what you're saying?
It's going to be pretty high level, yes.
Okay, fine. Tim first and then Patrick. Tim?
Thank you, John. And building between the last couple of items, actually, there is work underway on a complete revision of the urgent and emergency care strategy across that whole pathway, including 999, 111, and leading, I believe, into emergent departments. I understand that a draft of that is due out later this month, so we'll watch that in interest, because of course that will play into the ICSs, but also in terms of wider pieces in terms of commissioning, and also to reaffirm what Karen has said, that again, I understand the NHS long-term plan will remain as is. Thank you.
Yes, just a point of detail to add in the context of the long-term plan is the National Workforce Plan that I think we've been waiting for a very long time, and I don't know the latest position on that, but in terms of developing local strategies within constraints, parameters, guidance, we're missing that key element from a workforce perspective as well.
Sorry, Margaret.
As we're doing these plans at high level, could we be clear on what's going to be different so that we have something to consult people on? So if sometimes we end up spinning ourselves and we don't know what the changes are, and if we could just be specific, and this is what it means, and this is what it will look like, and this is why it's different. I think that's important in both of our plans, both at ICB and ICP.
If not, you end up writing one generic one that could fit in Manchester, Birmingham here or whatever, and what's unique about us.
Not only what's unique about us, but what it was like this year and what it's going to be like next year.
So the difference. What's going to change? That's a fair
Yeah.
challenge. What does it look like that's changing? So if we could capture that, Rachel. Okay. Happy to go through the next phase? So let's look to the recommendations. Again, I'm not going to read them out. I'll do it by exception. Have a quick read. Is there anything in there that you would like to disagree with? If not, I shall take the recommendations as written. Lovely, thank you. Those are accepted. So, we've been efficient with time, colleagues. So, it basically says here, comfort break. Would you like to comfort break now, or would you like to crack on until 11:55? What's the consensus?
Just jump in.
We have
Okay.
I'll do that.
That's all right. So we'll crack on, I think, and maybe get one more item done if that's okay. But we will stop at 5 to 12 then, and then we'll have a comfort break then. So if I can turn to the ICB committee chair updates first. In no particular order as I go around, I'll just look towards colleagues first. Sanj, any update that you'd like to pick out as an exception?
No, there's only one point, which was around ESRF and our assumption that that will not be carried forward into budget planning for 23-24, and that we just want to make everyone on the ICB aware of that, and so we need to ensure providers, but also the ICB is aware that that needs to be factored into budget planning, which I think Rachel and Simon are both on board with.
Any questions for Sanj on his paper?
I suppose just to augment that a little is because we obviously need to make sure that we are delivering on our 78-week reduction and our cancer reduction. So the joint work that we're doing with RCHT and UHP is to ensure that ESRF allocation is prioritised. Any slippage is then used for mitigations that mean we meet our constitutional standards with regards to elective and cancer care.
Just give us 30 seconds on how you're feeling the reporting in your committee's going.
We're getting better on the format, I think, and it's combining finance and performance. A few minor points. We'd like to see the finance reporting up front.
Right.
It's at the bottom of the report. And I think at the moment there's more information than is required in the main report, and some of this needs to move into the appendices. But broadly speaking,
going in the right direction.
It's in the right direction.
I hope the executive group agree with you on that. Is that fair? Very good, very good.
Yes, sir.
Very good.
Progress,
Thank
I
you.
think.
Well done, Sanj. Thank you. Neil.
From the Primary Care Commissioning Committee, you'll note some good things in there in terms of performance, but I would draw to your attention that the GP resilience risk rating has increased, and as a result there will be a development meeting of the Primary Care Commissioning Committee looking closely at GP resilience in the coming month, and that will look and also be an opportunity to look at the fuller stock take, and a reminder to the board that there is a responsibility for the Integrated Care Board to look at issues around primary care, remembering that primary and community care is a huge element of all of the issues we talk about in all our meetings. So that was what I wanted to bring on that one.
Thank you.
Do you want me to talk about ICA?
Just before you move on, anything on that particular committee? No, please, next one.
In terms of the ICA,
oh,
you'll have...
sorry, Mary, did you want to ask on?
Yeah, sorry. What are we doing about it? Yes.
So there are, it would be, without going into a great deal of detail, there is a good deal of resilience work that ongoes all the time. The issue with general practice and primary care being small organisations that in themselves are businesses, and the risks involved to individuals in that, especially around succession planning, are definitely an issue. And the Primary Care Directorate are very aware of those and do provide support. Where people come along early enough, that is the key. And that is why detailed discussion about the issues in a public session is really quite an issue for individual general practices. And it would be incorrect for populations of general practices to be made aware of issues that would only worry them. To answer your question, there is work ongoing all the time. More can be done, and bringing in partners in terms of, and Andy may wish to comment as primary care partner, around there are very good groupings around primary care networks and integrated care areas. Some primary care networks are very good at looking after what's going on in their primary care network on an individual practice basis, and some practices share the worries they have greatly, so there is work that goes on at that level. But please be assured that the Primary Care Directorate is pretty aware where there are problems and can put in and does offer support.
Yes, ma'am.
Just very briefly, and thank you for that. Given the point about they are businesses, and we always talk about them from a health perspective, do they link or do they choose to link in with other community business support groups, as any other business in our community?
I would be talking only from my experience as a GP and say not actively, although as primary care networks they have the potential to do that kind of thing and have reached out and looked, and some have looked beyond let's say shared resilience in terms of the activities they need to deliver beyond the traditional health sector. So some have looked at grants and other ways of providing ways of working. that's fairly early. It's only 2 to 3 years since primary care networks, but they have formed, many have formed legal entities to allow them to do such.
Thank you.
Your second committee now?
ICA committee, you'll have noted that the timing of the committee did not really allow a full report, but we met last week and we revisited in some detail the values and visions, many of which I will say reflect the True North approach. There were many things that have been brought out of the meeting. One approach taken, this is very brief, one approach taken was to future focus and look at maybe in 5 years' time what good work at Place would deliver and look like. And there are two statements that I've distilled from the many that have arisen. One is, at Place we have decided to deploy resources geared to people and not by organisation. Two is, at Place we have a vibrant, happy, multidisciplinary workforce who work seamlessly together, playing to each other's strengths, skills and knowledge. And out of that came statements as to what we might need to do and what we view and the ambition we have for integrated care areas. Integrated care areas are conveners of teams with the ability to pool budgets, and integrated care areas have the ability to unlock a proportion of local resources and budgets and offer personal and/or integrated budgets. So others were at that meeting and might wish to comment, but I just wanted to bring to you a flavour of where we're getting to, because we do need to look ahead if, as we stated in the ICS paper earlier, that everything revolves around Place. One thing that came out was we need people to think Place now in terms of their own and partners in terms of their own approach going forward, because otherwise things develop and get left behind when actually they're already ongoing. So we do need to keep making those links across all the organisations. Thank you.
Any questions for now? How's your report? Oh, sorry, Rachel.
Just to, I think it was a really important development session for us to have as an ICA committee in the context of some of the other items that we've described, and to really try and respond to the mandate from this board around the importance of Place and how we really deliver on the promise and the commitment around integration as a partnership, so with our provider colleagues and our voluntary sector as well. I did just want to express my thanks to Juliet Ferris, who helped facilitate us. She did an absolute sterling job, and I think we really enjoyed that precious time together. And again, in the kind of the resources that we're trying to build in is to make sure that we can use our ICA committee to have good development time as partners and business time, so we can really start to take the steps now, John, in with our partners, mapping out the steps to that ambition and what year 1, year 2, etc. looks like to factor into the strategies we discussed. I think that's fair.
Very good. Andy?
Just very quickly, we've agreed that ongoing development space is critically important for that committee, and agreed to have another one early in the new year.
I can't imagine there's anyone around the table who wouldn't support the concept of Places key and scale and speed of scaling up is a direction of travel. If anyone would like to disagree with that, please shout now. I didn't think there'd be too many voices then, but let's do what we can to support you to do that. So Neil, how's the reporting going in those two committees? Are you happy with the way it's being reported?
Yeah, bearing in mind that it's a new committee, and in terms of what we need to do now, we will hold alternate, more formal business-like with reporting of activity, and then take in the development sessions. The ability to think strategically and the time out to do that, can't underestimate that. So I'm happy with things at the moment, bearing in mind this was a new approach.
Chair, isn't it? Okay, so let's move on. Martin.
Thanks, John. Yeah, we had finance audit committee in October, which the majority of which was the sort of normal rote stuff, if you like, which was very successful. I think, to preempt your question, the reporting is pretty straightforward. The majority of the stuff comes through well. We're happy with the internal and external audit reports. I think the one thing we've been I suppose having under development is the board assurance framework and risk analysis, some of which is coming later today actually. So once we get that approved and agreed, we can start to roll that better into our audit committee reviews, I think. The one bit to probably highlight is that we did have a meeting external to the audit committee of the audit committee chairs locally. Thank you to Sarah Newton, who used the kind offices of Royal RSC to help RCHT to help sort of minute and arrange the meeting. What we did there was think about what we needed to do cross-cuttingly and how to, I suppose, get best value from our auditors and only do things once where appropriate. So where there might be cross-cutting audits, we talked about how we could set those up, only do them once rather than 3 or 4 times, and also work out how to, I suppose, allocate any outcomes from those and monitor them where they're out with our own organisations, as is sometimes the case with cross-cutting things. We also talked about system-wide risks and how we reflect those in our audit committees and our assurance frameworks. And I think that's now something that's come out slightly nationally. Again, I think we've got something later about how system risks have to be reflected and understood in our individual organisations. So perhaps we're slightly ahead of the game, but I think that was useful, especially in trying to not duplicate.
Thank you. Any questions for Martin? Yeah.
It's not a question, John, it's just as you've raised it, Martin, the other committee chairs, and I know with CFT as well, are looking to see how people can work closely together. And I think there are going to be further meetings based on, that was a sort of experimental, wonder if it will work model. So any learning coming from that will be really valuable, but I know the other chairs are looking to set those meetings up.
I think it's a perfect moment to sort of say, as we started on the 1st of July, it was important to get these committees up and functioning, and now it's important to actually start collectively bringing these things together so we don't have duplication and we work collectively. Thank you, Martin. Carol, both of yours, please.
Quality and Pathways of Care met for the second time, and the one item I'd like to draw your attention to is the Clinical Summit, which met on the 12th of October, which is a meeting of clinical leaders. I believe the second one is still scheduled in for the 14th of December. So I would just encourage those that have senior clinical leaders that should be there to give them the space to be there. The feedback was there were a couple of items that came out of that, such as a dynamic risk assessment, which is in use, which was really useful. But I think if we've got the right people in the room at the right time, a difference can be made, basically. In terms of preempting your question about the rest of the committee, John, I think it's fair to say that we've met twice, so there's an issue around updates rather than meaningful information. So there's been a lot of updates, so we need to shift that towards meaningful information, and we definitely need to look at the timings. So at the moment we're running behind the board and behind everything else, which means therefore it's just a series of updates, which is not really of any use to anybody. So we need to just get ahead of ourselves and be more critical in looking at the information. And certainly now that I've got my head around the agenda more, I'll be a bit more demanding in terms of what I expect to see at the committee. And we are moving towards an integrated quality performance report, and yeah, I'm hoping to see some shift in that pretty quickly. And the Citizen Engagement and Equalities Committee hasn't met since we last had board. We're meeting in December.
Any questions for Carol? No? Excellent, thank you very much. So let's move on to partner member updates. So, I'm sorry, it's you in the corner there.
Sorry, hidden around the corner.
Sorry, Tara, apologies.
Okay, so in terms of workforce, our main focus has been on development of the strategy. And looking at some metrics around that, so that it really demonstrates it's not just a paper document and an agreement in principle, but a real opportunity to demonstrate values and to put them into action while we're waiting for a national workforce plan. There is still plenty that we can do at a local level to really shift the dial. In terms of we're working on metrics, particularly around recruit, train and retain, and how we treat our workforce at the moment is going to be absolutely imperative. We're also looking at metrics potentially around place, but also around the use of agency and how much agency is going on, because it's such a critical point in terms of bottom line. The three immediate priorities that people were coming out with were supporting the workforce this winter, and a real need to have a coordinated response to that, to make sure that our staff know what they are and aren't entitled to and how we can support them. But also opportunities to look to the future, not just work on our immediate priorities, but to look at opportunities for collaboration. And we're going to look in part 2 about resourcing and how we go into that. And the only other thing I'd ask you to note is that the Real Living Wage Foundation have stated that the real living wage should be rising to £10.90. That's going to have quite a big impact in terms of bottom line for quite a lot of organisations who are committed to real living wage.
Any questions for Tan? Anything else, Tanya, you want to add? No.
Not a question, but a comment. The supermarkets are already way over the real living wage, and it's just a nightmare recruiting in social care.
Okay, colleagues, I'm looking at the clock, so I think we've done remarkably well. Why don't we break at this point, and then we've got a nice structured way of coming back with the partner updates and then moving on. So we're a few minutes ahead, so why don't we come back sharpish, please, and start again at 5 past. Is that okay with everyone? Thank you so much, everyone.
Okay.
On page
Oh, thank you.
112 million.
Yeah.
And it does.
No, goes on the goes to the pharma company.
Gosh, that's not like me. 2 minutes late. That's because it's windy outside. The ship would have sailed without me then. Oh. Be waving it from the port side. Right, away we go. So, we're still on item 11. If we can just check now with the ICB partner member update. So I'll look round this way first. So, Steve.
Yeah, very happy to go first. Thank you for that, John. So, a lot of information in the report. I won't go through all of that, but you'll see the significant actions that NHS providers have taken to address the ambulance handover challenges, and the paper focuses on that. Clearly, there are actions underway right across the system as well. But if I can particularly highlight the Royal Cornwall Hospital Frailty Same-Day Emergency Care Service, the SDEC facility, which is a 12-space facility to rapidly pull patients from emergency department, from ambulances, to undertake a rapid assessment, and where it's appropriate to avoid extended time in hospital and potentially avoid unnecessary admissions as well. So that came online just a couple of weeks ago, and also to acknowledge the significant amount of work underway at Cornwall Partnerships, NHS Foundation Trust, and with system partners, including humans, to enable a significant increase in discharge capacity from a P1 perspective. So both of those particularly have had a significant additional capacity impact, which have complemented the work across the system. NHS providers have really closely engaged in the System Control Centre, and that's been covered already. But if I can just acknowledge Susan's leadership and recognise that that's a really significant step forward with the establishment of the System Control Centre, and really positive to see system coordination and all providers engaging in that. And I think that will go from strength to strength as an important part of our system response going forward. All of those things and the other work underway have had a significant impact on ambulance handover times, and what we've seen for the last 2 full weeks is a sustained significant improvement, about a 40% reduction in total 40%, 40% reduction in ambulance handover total lost hours. We do have a long way to go, and we shouldn't in any way rest on that. We continue doing everything we can. Nevertheless, I think it's right for us to recognise the efforts of everybody across the system have enabled that improvement over the last 2 weeks, and that's ahead of our trajectory for improvement up to the end of October, start of November. So really, really positive to see that. We do have a challenge and a risk, and I'll just briefly cover that. The total number of Royal Cornwall Hospital beds being occupied by patients waiting to be discharged. Waiting to be discharged.
Where's that coming from?
Sorry, Steve. I don't know what I've done.
So the total.
With mics or mics.
With the mic away.
I'll try continuing to talk. So the total number of externally delayed discharge patients at Royal Cornwall Hospital had been reducing really well, and the position on the 31st of October, the total number of delayed discharges had reduced to 82, and that was pretty much on trajectory. Our trajectory at that point was 78. The issue to flag is
celebration, by the way. That's right.
Quite
She's as
right.
pleased as I am. Go on, keep going.
Since then, since the 31st of October, it's deteriorated from 82 to 104. So it's about a 25% deterioration. It's really, really important that we address that, turn that trend around, and return that position to the trajectory that it was on. The key challenge for Royal Cornwall hospitals is that there is no longer sufficient capacity within CFT-hosted services to support the continued level of P1 discharge and P2 community hospital discharge. And the primary challenge that CFT face is a capacity challenge within the social care environment. So that is a challenge, and it's alongside all of the NHS and wider system actions. It's also important that we have that continued trajectory of reducing the number of patients who no longer need to be in hospital. So that's a real area of focus across the system, so we can address that. One of the impacts of that changed position is the performance for this week operationally has been more challenged than the previous 2 weeks. So we need to recognise that as RCHT and as SWAST and as a wider system. On a positive side, even with that deteriorated performance over the last couple of days, the recovery each day has been much more rapid than it's been previously, and we've also seen a reduction in the longest individual wait, even in this period of increased challenge. So all of that is signalling that the actions that are being taken across the system are having an impact in reducing the overall lost time and reducing the individual long waits as well.
Any comparison to the rest of the country?
So we had been and we continue to be in cohort 1 of trusts. So the most challenged trusts in the country are in cohort 1 from an ambulance handover perspective, and we had been the most challenged in that cohort 1. We're now just better than the average of cohort 1, so that's progress. We did slightly better than one of the cohort 2 trusts, so all of that is signalling that we are on the right direction. The trajectory that we set out, and we're discussing this in further detail with our system executive group tomorrow, is a 3-stage improvement trajectory. Stage 1 by the end of October to have moved from the most challenged in cohort 1 to the average of cohort 1. We've achieved that. Stage 2 by the end of November to have moved to the average of cohort 2 trusts, and then stage 3 by the end of March next year to have returned to our performance in Q1 21-22. And what that means at a headline is we had been operating at about 1,500 hours of ambulance lost hours per week. By the end of October to be at no more than 900. We achieved that, and that's the 40% first reduction. By the end of November to have improved that to no more than 600 hours. That would be the average of cohort 2 trusts. And then by the end of March next year to have no more than 300 hours. So a 900, 600, 300 trajectory. And just to note that there is a direct correlation between ambulance lost hours and category 2 response times. So there's a very, very strong correlation to ambulance 2 response times, and that has a direct impact on quality and outcome.
So Tim, what's your reflections on that?
Tim, you're on mute.
We can't hear you. There you go. Yes.
Yeah. So yes, it's a good 2 weeks, and we are keen to see that sustain. Welcome the move in that direction, and now hearing about the trajectories that bring us down to close to what we would want to see. Of course, that many hours is still more than any would want. We are seeing, as Rachel's just put in the chat, across the region also improvements as well, which is pleasing, as good practice is being increasingly embedded across trusts and systems. We're working through SCCs across the patch to see that, and as Steve said at the end there, we are seeing a direct correlation, particularly on CAP2, and that for a trust is improving. And actually we are now moving to be where we were an outlier during the summer to be actually more within the pack. We are not quite at the average yet. When we extrapolate though out of Cornwall is still an area that is performing worse than average within the SWAS family. But pleasing to get where we are, support everything that Steve's talked about, and indeed the initiatives that are underway, and looking forward to seeing how we can work together continually to get us through the winter as you know those other challenges come in around us.
Prism levers. Do we know?
It's a phased down of some of the programmes through the end of November into December. So because some of the programmes had a soft start, we're just working through with each of the work streams, the actual end date and embedding and transfer points.
Thank you very much indeed. Emma.
Thank you. Yes, absolutely. Welcome and echo what is tremendously hard work in a really, really risky and challenging situation of a prolonged nature. I'm just interested, conscious that UHP is obviously a feed for a lot of our population, how things are panning out there. Tim, your reflections on that?
Yeah, yeah, UHP is now the most challenged area that we have in terms of you know, sustained pieces. They have good days and they have less good days, and I know that again we continue to work closely with the Zevon system around doing that. So it does affect our patients and our communities towards the east of the patch. That is reflected in there. And actually those in the actual Plymouth area itself are also seeing those difficulties. You know, there are some infrastructure challenges I know that Derriford face in terms of the structure and set out, but at the same time I know that they are continuing to work hard. But again, we've split Devon into two pieces within SWAS for reporting purposes, and the south and west piece, which is UHP plus Torbay, is one which is under a lot of pressure, which we recognise.
Okay.
Yeah, I was going to pick it up actually in my update. So yes, I mean I think as Steve and others have said, I think certainly UHP has unfortunately risen to the top in terms of challenge performance, and although again some small improvements in that, and I think a number of the initiatives that RCHT have put in place, UHP are also implementing, but the effect hasn't yet been fully seen, although I think a small improvement in category 2. I mean, the other thing to say is that there has been a considerable amount of work as well, not just in relation to activity or focus within the model of care within the hospital, because there is a lot to do that within the constraints of the actual physical building, but actually also in terms of supporting discharge, and we've been working very closely with colleagues in Cornwall in addressing that and improving that. So to say thank you to that, but again more work to be done. So yeah, it's top of my to-do list.
So while you have the floor, why don't you do your update?
Oh, okay. It's just in terms. I wasn't really going to say much more, really. Just to say, in fact, our ICB board is, in fact, next week. So this is the report that came from last time. And as I said before, in many respects, we have incredibly a lot of alignment almost in terms of the challenges and the areas that we are working on. I think it's fair to say we haven't done such a good job as yourselves in terms of honing down our priorities. So we've got quite a lot on that currently. So I think we know that we want to do much more focus on that as we start to continue to develop our ICP strategy. I think also the other piece of work, which again, you know, has been around our workforce plans, and you know, as I said before, the more that we can share and work on that together, the better. So one of the things that I will get in contact with Kate, and in her absence, Carolyn and Susan, is now that I've got my team in place, how we bring both exec teams together in the first instance to sort of do some work to compare and contrast. And actually, and I think, John, it probably when we meet with Sarah, it would be quite good to have a conversation about how we might want to do some joint board work at a later stage. We've got quite a lot on, I know, at the moment, but there is, the reality is we're having some of the same conversations in two different places.
Very good. Thank you very much indeed. Rachel.
Just to bring both those items together, particularly from the UHP perspective, just a recognition of the significant partnership working that's happening across providers. Our joint commissioners, particularly around that supporting accelerating discharges, both in terms of the numbers but also length of stay. So in terms of a UHP, just to correlate with the numbers that Steve described, over the last 3 weeks we've seen a 54% reduction in the number of delayed discharges at UHP, and we are reducing down the super stranded in terms of some of the bespoke capacity for dementia that's come online since we last met at a board, and some of the joint work we've been doing with Jane's team and the local authority around the care hotel. But we obviously need to make sure that we embed that, particularly ahead of winter.
Thank you. Let's move on. Debbie.
Thank you. So I think Steve covered off CFT from a community perspective, but as the mental health and learning disabilities partner on the board, I'd also like to flag that the risks that we do see in terms of timely access to mental health beds. So mental health capacity remains at Opal 4, particularly our older adults, mental health bedded capacity and the specialist dementia care end, and we're regularly carrying 60% of our wards with delayed discharges because of lack of onward care of people who are actually very frail and unwell and distressed. And the consequence, although the numbers are much smaller, the consequences are that on occasions we have no choice but to take new admissions out of county, and some of those admissions are many, many counties away, which causes considerable distress to those who are taken to an inpatient unit outside of the South West Peninsula and to their families. So the numbers are smaller, but the impact is significant, and I did want to make sure that we were cognizant of that today. If I could then move on from urgent and emergency care pressures, in keeping with the update that I provided at the last meeting, we have followed with a thematic approach today, and I'm very grateful to colleagues at Pentraeth who used this as an opportunity to absolutely demonstrate just a high-level summary of the extraordinary work that they do in partnership with our organisation, but also with others, to ensure that we have got a range of meaningful community opportunities that help people with severe and enduring mental illness back into work, or to seek work in the first place. And the power of those health coaches and also the peer support workers is absolutely immense and extraordinary. And we heard from Tarn earlier about building trust within communities and working in partnership in this way between statutory agencies who are there to provide the support when people become unwell and have a crisis, but also are engaged more locally in community activities that have real meaning to them is really, really important. So I wanted to applaud the work undertaken by Pentraeth, and I would hope that colleagues here would welcome further updates about other partnership activities. If I could then, there are a couple of things that since I submitted the report to update the board on with regards to learning disabilities, and I'm delighted that Jane's here in person today, so because there's an opportunity for Devon and Cornwall to be working together to improve the availability of care and support for people with a learning disability who may need admission to hospital. And the national team have now made available and confirmed the availability of £40 million of capital for the South West region. And that capital is proposed to be located at the north end of the region, so probably in the Avon, Wiltshire area, and then an allocation to Devon and Cornwall. Now, again, numbers are small, but this is specialist inpatient care. Devon's in a very different position to Cornwall in terms of its achievement of trajectory of inpatients, but nevertheless we are working together now on a proposal. The commissioning of the model, the revenue consequences will be for the Integrated Care Board. So taking my South West Region Chief Exec's lead hat off for learning disabilities and now putting my Cornwall and Isles of Scilly hat on, I have this week facilitated a conversation between the specialist clinicians in CFT and the Integrated Care Board commissioners, and the next step is a joint piece of discussion with Devon and Joe's lead, Joe Turl, so that we can bring a high-level outline paper to the board in December, and in all probability will be requiring a decision in January or February to meet with the national timeline. My final piece is just to say it would be really good to circulate as an attachment to the minutes the publication this week of the CQC report into Why I Matter, which was a report into the experiences of people with a learning disability attending acute trusts and what we can learn from that. I'm delighted to say we have got excellent partnership working between our learning disability liaison nurses at RCHT and our specialist teams in primary care. And again, I think this is an opportunity to ensure that this board remains cited on national reports, but also what we're doing about it in the county. So thank you, John, for
thank you. Any questions?
Time.
Yes, Rachel.
Just to say, I think as we've plotted on the work plan as some of our strategic priorities like LD&A, these are exactly the type of products that will come aligned to each of the strategic priorities, the case for change or the business cases. What would be good, Debbie, just offline to work through that timescale of submission, just make sure we've got the right governance steps so we don't trip ourselves up later on in terms of we followed all of those and with Devon so that we can make sure that we meet that timeline.
Okay. Rachel.
I wanted to lend support to the approach of highlighting partners in your report and put Pentraeth in this example and support your view around the usefulness and how that they've expressed that in that report.
Oh, do you want to talk to Al's report?
Yes, briefly, and it's a joint report, so it's from both local authority care and wellbeing and the Director of Public Health. And I mean, I think that the report shows that there's considerable pressure still and demand in people waiting for an assessment for social care. That has reduced by around 36% since April, which is, you know, about a considerable amount of work, but still that's obviously a priority for the system. Social care provides services to around 6,300 people currently. The report gives an outline of some of the performance against the outcomes framework, which is the Adult Social Care Outcomes Framework, which I think I hope is a helpful sort of position for people at the board to see and highlight some of the key areas of challenge and some of those that are better. For example, direct payments for people who are carers is very strong in Cornwall. One of the things it includes is a reference to the budget, so we've already covered that, but I just want to sort of update that I have realised that the budget for Cornwall Council has now been published, and that is now formally out to consultation from the 11th of November. When I say that, it's tomorrow, 11th of November to the 8th of January, so I thought I'd just make that correction. It does detail all of the key lines of inquiry if you want to drill into the BI reporting system and have a look at that. From the public health side, you know, I have published the Director of Public Health report through various committees, and I'm bringing that to this board in December, and it does look at an asset-based approach to health and hopefully fits within the 5 priorities that we discussed today through True North. And also there's some further opportunities around Start for Life and children and young people's health, integrating services for that first 1,001 days, which is so important. So just some key points from the report.
Questions? Steve?
I think it's a really helpful report. Thank you. It's really useful to see the clarity on information, and I think that's helped me understand some of the challenges that adult social care are facing more directly. So I'm really grateful for that. I had two questions. One about the budget, and it's just really to make sure I understand it. The current context talks about adult social care having a £15 million demand management target, and I'm mindful we had a comment or a question earlier on from a member of the public suggesting a £29 million savings challenge for next year. So if it's possible, just to have some clarity on whether that 15 million demand management target is separate or is an addition. And then I had a second question after that, if that's okay.
Yeah, deal with that one first. Do you know?
I think I'd rather Ali responded specifically to the detail
okay.
on that,
Yep.
if that's okay.
That's absolutely fine. I understand that. The second one was just reflecting back to the NHS provider partner member update and the challenges that we're facing operationally currently with a insufficient social care capacity to support P1 discharges from CFT. Is there any update on the actions underway to seek to address that?
And I think I would ask Ali to respond directly on that question.
Is that something which you can do offline before the next board meeting? Is that something we could organise, just to give a direct feedback to Steve? So Rachel, did you want to say something, Rachel?
I think it's appropriate that Ali addresses that from an adult social care perspective. But what I would say, Steve, it's something I can bring through from the performance report. Some of the mitigations that we've got, we are increasing our enablement capacity during November with some supplementary providers to help support on P1. We've also been doing some bespoke work with CFT, particularly in some of the one of the problems we've got in some of our pathways are areas in our current geography where we do really struggle with the market. We are there looking at how we use our Abbey Care provision in a different way that is then aligned to those individuals that we haven't been able to place. So I do think over the month of November those mitigations are planned to take effect, Steve, as well as the longer term and medium term solutions that Rachel and Ali have put in place in terms of some of the fair cost of care exercise and the ongoing procurements that we've got in the kind of reablement
So to try and help Rachel, just so it rests with me, if you've asked a question and we're saying let Al respond, how do we make sure Al knows what the question is and what will be the mechanism for her coming back?
I think we can note that from the actions and we can distribute that post today to get a response back and probably take that through SEG as well as then documenting back here.
I would suggest that if we had that updated SEG tomorrow, if it's possible, and I apologise to an extent, John, it's a tactical question. My reason for raising it in an integrated care board is it's material to ability this month to achieve that performance improvement trajectory from an ambulance handover perspective, but I do recognise it's very much a tactical discussion, but if the action was perhaps for that to report to SEG tomorrow and then we can, as necessary, report back to integrated care board.
If we just made it the fact that the mechanism for coming back, not through here necessarily, is through SEG, and as long as you're all happy, that works for us. Yes? Fine. Anything else, Rachel? Thank you. If we move on to Andy.
Sorry, Chair, I had a question.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
I'm looking at page 13 of Rachel's report. I mean, first of all, I thought it was incredibly helpful to have this level of detail, so I welcome and applaud the report. But I was quite surprised to see that our admissions to care homes being below the England and South West average, because we had previously heard that Cornwall had a tendency to over-prescribe onward care, and I wondered whether this was an artefact of the fact that we've got so many people waiting for care homes, or whether there was whether this was a surprise, I guess, to you, Rachel, as Director of Public Health, because I wasn't expecting to see that number.
Yeah, from my understanding, that's actually been the case for over a year at least. So it's sort of a process that isn't a new sort of change in direction in terms of that outcomes framework benchmarking. But I think any detail I think we'd have to pick up with Ali in her for her response on that.
I echo the report. I thought it was really first rate. Pass that on if you second to you as well. Thank you, Andy.
Thank you, Chair. I've produced a brief report, and deliberately so because a number of other primary care items have been included in the agenda. So I draw the board's attention to the Chief Executive update that had a primary care item, and obviously Neil's report from PCCC. The one thing I wanted to update is not included in my report. So the conversation we were having around general practice resilience, and in my primary care partner role, considering how I support that and how we as an ICB support that, we are the statutory commissioners of general practice, but actually how do we support our general practice providers. So this week I've met with the Primary Care Network clinical directors, with Kerno Health and representatives from the local medical committee, and we've agreed a way forward of joint working in a provider space, which I hope to be able to feed back at a future meeting.
Very good. Sounds very positive. Any questions for Andy? Okay, Emma.
Thank you. There's a few updates in the report, but I just wanted to draw your attention because I think it links to what Steve was talking about in terms of discharge and capacity. And just to really give my thanks to colleagues in the voluntary sector who in just over a month have set up a single access point for discharge, TOC referrals and public referrals for anybody who's worried about somebody either coming home from hospital or at home in the community already and at risk. That service is called the Community Gateway. It's staffed by a whole range of different organisations, including organisations that deliver CQC regulated care. It's 8 till 8, 7 days a week, and is available. We've got some referral details out, which hopefully you'll have seen through your staffing networks. That's gone out. We haven't done a public launch yet. We wanted to just test this softly and get all of our processes in place. It's linked to the hub network. It's there to undertake personalised care and support plans and anticipatory care plans, both over the phone, virtually, or in people's home if that's required. And we're already starting to talk to Cornwall Council about how we might support the elective waiting list at the moment to see how we can keep people waiting while at home using that service as well. And also, just to pick up on the point around discharge, we're facilitating with Rachel's team, looking at how we can better collaborate around discharge in the voluntary sector, again bringing more organisations together to get the best of the skills and expertise that we've got, rather than specifically commissioning individual organisations. So it's a huge piece of work and I'm just really proud of the sector. So hopefully your staff are starting to feel that that's somewhere that they can refer to. It's in a kind of test and learn phase, so any comments, feedback, we'd really welcome that. Any changes that you think would be good to make for your staff and for people, then please do let us know and we can take that back in. I just wanted to also pay tribute to the collaboration of that piece of work and also the community hubs, and particularly Rachel and her team, but also Cornwall Council and of a range of voluntary sector organisations. And it really has been transformational, actually, the way that we've been working. You know, this isn't about you say, we know what we want to do, can you go away and do it? This is a genuine partnership and we are co-designing this service together, and it's really is making the best use of the capacity and expertise we've got, I think, and I'd really like to see that way of working, and I know with Rachel there it will continue, because actually we've been focused on outcomes and then together we figured out what's the best way of doing that, and it's been absolutely fabulous. And the thing that the voluntary sector is really good at is moving at speed. So the one thing I'd ask from the board is give us a little bit of time. So we don't do a huge amount of planning first. We start doing some stuff first, and that means that we then need to test and learn and refine as we go. So do give us time and a bit of space just to trial that, and as well we'd welcome feedback on that. The only other thing, again, I think it's been mentioned a number of times as a potential risk for our sector, again, is our workforce and resilience and well-being. And I think that's in common with all of other staff in the room. You know, they've been working at pace over the last 2 or 3 years. And I think it's fair to say that the complexity of individuals that people are working with is increasing. So it's a key focus for us as an organisation and for the sector. And I'm already speaking to Patrick about how we can make sure that our workforce is included as part of the wider health and care workforce. But I think there are some things we can do to make sure people feel valued and that we can support them with their own well-being. Just wanted to, I can't help but feel an amazing sense of pride with everybody involved. It's been absolutely tremendous, the innovation, the willingness, the collaboration and the passion to do the right thing for people in their communities. I would really encourage the board members, go and visit a hub, go and see it, go and feel it. There's nothing, honestly, it's an absolute joy. But I think actually it would just help put in context the degree of the support for our people, and the style and the holistic nature, which is absolutely the embodiment of place. So I'm sure on behalf of the board, just echoing the thanks for people involved, and maybe Chair, maybe a patient story might be useful back to the board. I get the joy of seeing those each week from agencies, and there's nothing more than bringing to life the difference that they make.
On the point about getting out and seeing these, where could we get a list of where to visit?
So we're about to put in place in the new year a series of hub visits, just so that we can manage that on behalf of the organisations who are working out there. So
you'll reach out to board members?
We'll reach out, yeah. So if we do a little bit of
a
roadshow list, and then people are very welcome to come along and join us. And just to let Debbie know as well, we've just this week, we're hoping probably for the beginning of next week to get it confirmed that we're going to have mental health capacity as well, in terms of our mental health peer support workers in the gateway, and aligning all of the work that Debbie and Pentrith are doing around the mental health transformation with the hub network as well. So it's expanding all the time.
It's great news. Absolutely great news. Any questions for Emma?
Could I just say, John, that this is absolutely fantastic at Place, and it comes back to one of our core principles of connecting communities, and this is actually it in practice now. It's moving from that vision commitment to one of actual on the ground. And I met with a group of trainee social workers last week, and they are just so dialed into these community resources already, which is absolutely fantastic at an individual citizen level.
I'm pleased to share with you, when I speak to my colleagues around the country, the other 41 ICB chairs, we reach out and have a conversation about a variety of things. And when we talk about this kind of thing, I'm delighted to say we seem to be so much further ahead in terms of our thinking and doing in this space. Okay, we've got to scale it still, but lots of other people are chatting it through, and I think we're actually starting to get rubber on the tarmac, as it were. Okay, can I just have one practical question? Do you sit on the ICPG? Who sits on the IPCG?
It's a commissioner, joint commissioning between the local authority and the ICB.
When you're doing the reviewing of the third sector part of the 33 million, how's that functioning in that meeting?
So obviously we have commission arrangements that sit outside in terms of the individual schemes. We also, through the governance that you saw through the BCF paper, a direct relationship in terms of delivery with the intermediate care board for delivery. So they help inform the pipeline for slippage.
So again, just managing expectations. When we talked earlier on about what we expect back on the other bit, are we expecting, as part of the 33 million, to have the report back in December on this side as well?
Yeah, we're already aligned on that, John.
Isn't it great to align each other? Excellent. Okay, thank you. So I hope you feel, I think I've covered everybody off. Yeah?
Sorry, I was slow and missed a question for Steve on the partner update. Can I ask something? Steve, it was about the same-day emergency care facility. I was very interested to see that, and if you remember, one of the questions that came from the public to the board last month was about patient journeys and how they end up where they do and all that kind of thing. And I wondered whether there were two questions. One was, can we learn lessons from the people who you admit to that, hopefully turning around quite quickly, in terms of a bit how they ended up there, because I think there are lessons for the system in that. And I think also, is that a model that you can look at the resources needed to turn around people, albeit in Truro from all over the county, that can be translated to some of the aspirations that peripheral units have to work as effective same-day emergency care, or, although there's a bit of a misnomer in the name for some of the patients actually, or see and assess treatment units that we can take from that and spread out close to home.
Great questions. I think if we could progress those kind of opportunities, that would significantly increase the impact of that facility at Royal Cornwall Hospital by replicating that approach at sites across Cornwall and the Isles of Scilly. So I think absolutely we should review that, and that could be something we work together or we bring back to ICB as one of our partner member updates. And in terms of the lessons learned so far, it's only been operating for a couple of weeks, so I think we'll need to review that. But I think that's a great couple of questions and great challenge.
Thank you.
So I'm conscious that kind of update takes about 45 minutes, but I hope you feel we get a richness as a result of everyone feeding in and the ability to ask questions. So we'll keep that going, as that's all right with everybody. So let's move on. Thank you for that. Let's move on to item 12, which is transforming care for Cornwall. Rachel.
Thank you, Chair. Board members will be familiar. We've been on a journey with transforming care for Cornwall, and since we had the review that we've been doing over the summer in terms of ways of working and some of the changes that we talked about in terms of the programme last time, this report aims to update you on how those things are progressing. I'll take the report as read, but probably just a few things I want to pull out for you. We are working through with our PMO teams how we fully adopt our managing successful programmes type process, so we can get the real rigour and learn from some of our partners, particularly RCHT, where there is very well embedded MSP type processes, and I've induced within this paper a kind of gateway process, so we can have a review of where each of the 8 priorities are in terms of those gateways. We have included a high-level overview of each of the priority groups in terms of the work that's progressed over the last month. What we'll be doing in the next Transforming Care for Cornwall is actually having formal highlight reports which will look at actions over the last month, actions going ahead, any areas for escalation, and also in terms of the impact that we're having from each of the schemes that pulls through from the mandates that they received in the August meeting. And we aim then for those to come through here as a higher level report to the board for assurance. There's detail there in terms of each of those priorities. You'll see that they're at varying status. Much of that is a recognition of both the volume of work within each of the programmes and also the risk that we have flagged in terms of both the PMO resource and the capacity, given the scale of some of these changes that we are making, as well as dealing with the tactical and delivery response. And I would want to reinforce that, because our ability to go deeper and faster will be the requirement to be able to free people up to do that transformational space as well as the delivery. And I think the assessment in where we are reflects that at the moment, and is why we have put forward some intermediate resource to help support our major programmes on intermediate care flow and elective care. In terms of a few things just to also say in terms of the recommendations, we are looking at a development plan for our PMO in terms of how we ensure that we can fully embed those MSP processes, and that will go through to the executive team in between now and the board, and can bring a fuller update to SEG, as is the intention. As I said earlier, as well as the highlight report, we will start to see key projects coming up from each of the priorities. So, for example, an approach to how we intend to do population health, our business cases for elective care, which are planned for next month, and some of the work that Debbie mentioned around LD. And I think that will really enrich then what we see from the board in terms of, back to Margaret's point about what looks different, not just in terms of the strategy, but our transformational programmes and our cases for change should be clear in articulating that. Okay.
Any questions? So, a few observations before we get to the recommendations. On page 3, that graph, it doesn't translate very well when I get it printed out, but you've got it, you know what I'm talking about, because the papers are in colour. Absolutely love that approach of giving a high-level, quick sense as to where you're at and that kind of thing, so thank you for that. How you develop that will be, I think, really quite interesting. Other observations in part of the recommendations. I'm just trying to draw the line now between, so I mean, when you answered the public question about estate and our 8 strands, can I just rehearse again in my own mind how estates plays out in this thinking? Can you just say it again for me, so I'm quite clear how...
There is a programme of work that focusing on the development of an estate strategy. Yeah. We're not explicit in here about it as a separate priority. We have previously had discussions about how you cut the cake, because functionally you could end up describing everything that we do. So what also isn't in here explicitly, but it would be a core part of our operational plan and dialogue for moving into next year, is the finance sustainability programme. So as part of that programme, we're also going to include estates, and I'll bring that to the surface more and more over the next couple of months.
I did understand. I think what I'm trying to really say here is that when we're writing these sorts of things, I don't think it should be forgotten about. I think
No,
we should
indeed.
just not create a
Indeed.
ninth. I'm just saying,
no,
put
indeed.
the point in,
Indeed.
that's where it's being covered,
Yeah.
such that people get the range of those sorts of thinking. And the other one is an observation, no one did comment on it, but the PMO teams, there's quite a lot of them, it feels, how they all work together. Are we comfortable they're collaborating and working together, or just as an observation?
So certainly the teams are supporting a number of the programmes that we've got at the moment. I think there is still work to do in terms of the streamlining of our process and the capacity. So this is part of the work that Andrew is supporting, and my thanks to him for this paper, in terms of over the next few months, is actually to bring something back to SEG to think about how we might approach the scale of our PMO and the approach going forward.
I was just going to add to that. I think there's still, we haven't quite got there, a massive opportunity to take account of our PMO resource across the system. And for lots of reasons we haven't quite got there, but now's a good time to get that right alongside
Maybe we can pick
winter.
that up later on in the day.
Yeah.
Excellent, Rachel. Thank you ever so much, everyone. So let's go to the recommendations. Again, I'll do it by exception. There are 4 of them there. If you're all happy, I'll take it as approved. If not, please say no. So, Rachel, approved. Thank you very much. Item 13. So we've got 2 elements here, the performance and finance and then quality. So just so I'm clear, who's doing the finance and performance? Yeah, Simon.
I should have checked with you first, Chair Pony. We would like to take quality first, if possible,
Oh,
if
okay.
that's
Yeah,
okay
yeah,
with
yeah.
everybody.
Then Rachel cover performance, I found it.
Yeah,
Yes.
go for it.
If that's okay?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And apologies for hijacking you there. So what you have is the quality paper. We're continuing to refine this based on our journey with quality and quality metrics. We are moving towards that integrated performance report that we talked about last time. We're a further step forward. So we've reported within the report on those national standards that we have to report on, but we're also making great strides in being really clear about what are our local quality and safety metrics, and how do we match those to the 5 clinical strategic priorities, but also how do we match that to the work that we're doing through the system coordination centre, because it's really important. It's partly the question that Margaret asked about what looks different. It's also what's different for our population in terms of quality and safety, because we know our metrics are still not moving in the right direction. So the quality report will continue to be refined as we move along and agree those quality metrics. We're taking our quality metrics through our clinical reference group that Helen's already talked about, which we've attached to the system coordination centre. However, that clinical reference group will be widened into what will become our clinical advisory panel, as well as our priority clinical panel as well. So I'm really happy to take any comments that you've got on the metrics that we're reporting. However, I do want to point out that an awful lot of the conversations we're having, the distillation of those, comes down to how our population is being served in terms of the outcomes. And whilst when we look at our patient satisfactions, the friends and family tests, we get really good feedback and we get positive feedback. We also have to be mindful for those people that aren't able to access some of our services to give their feedback. And we're really keen to go on. I'm hoping some of the hubs, Emma, can help us with some of that feedback as well, and back at place through our ICAs. The only thing I would really like to highlight and say thank you. We've taken on as a system the dynamic risk assessment. This falls out of the work that was done in North Bristol around the model that they had, again, in response to their issues they had with ambulance clearance times. So we've adopted it at pace, I have to say, and thank you. I'd like to say thank you to Bernie George, who works at RCHT, because she's led this work for us with our clinical leaders. We are working through our PCNs so that our GP colleagues as well understand what we're trying to do with dynamic risk assessment. This is not about shifting risk, it's about how you disperse risk fairly. And one of the areas that we looked at, and it's come up for discussion today, was around our P1, our category 1 patients, and how we move them safely home
which we all agree is the best place for everybody to be, and we do that safely and we do that collectively. So we will continue to reflect that in the quality and safety report, and in answer with Carol talking about, you know, the quality and pathways of care group not just being about updates, it's the and so what's of the work that we do that we will report. And I will be taking this through, certainly through the FLOW programme, the quality metrics that sit around FLOW, so that we start to see that shift from the experience that our patients are currently undergoing. So I won't go through all of the reports, Chair, if that's okay, because there's an awful lot of information, but we will pull this together with finance and performance. Thank you.
Was there a reason why you wanted to go first?
I think it's really important that we, before we start talking about money and we talk about performance, we talk about the experience of patients, because we know at the time it's a really difficult time for everybody, and we know that harm we want to mitigate as much harm, and our metrics are not going in the right direction for many of our services. So I think it's important that we highlight it first.
Thank you. I've got some observations, but no.
I was very interested in the metric on patient deterioration. And if you take the term...
What page number?
Sorry?
What page number are you talking about?
Sorry, page 3. There's the outline of the metrics being looked at. And for me, the deterioration one, I just found myself thinking, is this something we measure because people are in our system, the statutory system? In other words, they're in an ambulance and they're deteriorating. They're in a bed in the right or wrong place and they're deteriorating, or is it wider than that? Because if you're going to look at reducing avoidable harm, you start to think about the conversations that the teams Emma's talked about are having with people at the outset about what do you need, and it's a widening of the approach to looking at that particular issue for me, because it can be very long or very fast, but it should be encompassed in the thinking, I think.
Other points?
The things jumped out for me, if you don't mind. HSMR has risen and is above where we'd like it to be. I just wondered if there was a project to understand where that has come from and hopefully get to some of the causes and bring it back down again. My second question was, on the waiting times, good news, I think, on some of the long waits, as we've reported quite a lot, but then the 52-week waits are going up at quite an alarming rate, and I'm just worried that, is the sort of tail gunning of the waiting list setting us up with a bigger problem in the near future as those earlier waits get a bit longer?
So from our Helen will also come in. So in terms of the HMSR, there was an awful lot of work that was done with RCHT. So where we know we've got really rich data, they did a deep dive, and I think, Steve, if I'm right, there's more work continuing, particularly around the stroke pathway. So some of the biggest drivers for us with our mortality of stroke is getting people to the stroke units, and we know that stroke falls under category 2 of our ambulance conveyance. So if ambulances are not being released to pick up patients within 18 minutes, which is the target, and it's extended as far as 5 hours, we know that there's going to be an obvious issue around mortality and morbidity. The other area for concern around mortality and morbidity is around our hip fractures, our fractured neck of femurs. We've seen, sadly, papers, the newspapers picking up stories where people have had long lies on pavements, in gardens, within their own home. That does adversely affect the outcomes for individuals having surgery. We know that falls is a particular problem. We've got to be really careful. We are doing all we can, and I'm very grateful to the colleagues across RCHT, CFT for taking on initiatives like boarding. So we're putting patients in spaces that weren't initially designed for patient care, but we're having to do that in order to clear ambulances off the forecourt. So what we have issues where we have potential extra risk for falls, and I know the staff are working really hard to mitigate through things like intentional rounding, but we know falls still presents us with an issue. And being able to get to our patients quickly in those back of those ambulances, particularly around sepsis as well. Huge amount of work that's gone on in RCHT to hit the sepsis targets. So we do know what's driving, Martin, our morbidity and mortality. We're doing some work. I know Helen's been in contact with Nigel Aitchison around how we also do some joint work with Plymouth and Devon, the wider Devon, around mortality and morbidity. But we've still got some work to do. And I can't stress it enough, all of the 5 clinical priorities that we've talked about will all make huge impacts, positive impacts on our patient morbidity and mortality. And in terms of your question around, I mean, I'm sure Steve will want to answer. I can answer from my previous experience working at RCHT. You're absolutely right. Tail gunning the end of the waiting list does pose a problem, and particularly when the waiting list is recategorised nationally on the basis of harm. So it's not done in chronological, it's done in terms of acuity. So that does cause a real headache. And the other thing that RCHT have been really ahead of the game with is how they manage their waiting list on the basis of equality. So it's another dimension to go into how you manage. So it is a big problem. So I will keep coming back to the strategic priorities around planned care are so important to land so that we can really make significant inroads into our planned care.
Can I just come in there? I'm really pleased to hear you say that, Susan, in terms of the equity of outcome aspect, because I really think it's something that we have an opportunity as a whole system to be able to once and for all sort this as a peninsula, because when we talk about quality, so often what we don't do is look at the differential quality that people experience, and who they are, if you like. Who are those people that get the worst quality of care rather than the kind of just generic, and their ability to be able to advocate for themselves within that system. You know, a lot of what we talked about last time was about people wanting to get home from hospital, but actually there's an awful lot of people that are in hospital that don't want to get home from hospital because they're going to be on their own and isolated. So how we can bring together our understanding from the voluntary and community sector with the statutory sector about, you know, as an NHS, your responsibility is to look at what's the matter with people, and what we do in the community sector is look at what matters to people and where the interventions are in between that.
Thanks, Susan. It's getting there. It's much better. So well done to the team. I just wanted to pick up the item on safeguarding on page 23. And this picks up my earlier comment about updates, really. So we've already highlighted that we've got 6 multi-agency safeguarding risk assessments, and then only one of them is actually containing health information, which is highly critical. And it's the last bullet for me, which is we're undertaking a gap analysis. Well, we actually know what the gap is. We know what the problem is. So what I'd be expecting to see is what are we going to do about it? And so if we are saying that we're going to update the ICB execs, I'm assuming that will come to quality first, but I would be urging everybody to work more collaboratively in getting a recommendation on the table that we can sign up to.
Absolutely, and I picked up that point with our Lado, who's head of our health safeguarding, how we join this on. I think, to be fair, in Cornwall, we've come a long way within safeguarding and the work that's done collaboratively, and that was echoed by the Lado, and talking to Meredith Teasdale as well around the safeguarding agenda for children. With the issues that we've got going on around health and social care, we have to be really, really clear, and which is why I want this to be a central focus, is safeguarding, because we know that our issues around safeguarding are on the rise, so we need to be really clear that we're sighted on it. So absolutely, it'll come back.
Steve first, and then Mary.
Just to come back to Martin's question about the 52-week waits, I think unfortunately we will need to have an expectation that 52-week waits will, at least in the short term, continue to increase. It's been very, very positive to see the 104-week waiting list being entirely addressed. That there are 2 patients currently waiting over 104 weeks, both through patient choice, and we'll continue to work with them to address that. We continue to make progress to achieve the patients waiting no more than 78 weeks by the end of March next year. Slightly behind trajectory currently, but we would currently anticipate we'd be able to achieve that. But that focus is putting pressure on the 52-week waiting times. And Martin, if I just give one example, we haven't been able to return the trauma ward, which was temporarily moved to St Michael's Hospital, back to Royal Cornwall Hospital because of the constraints we have around the number of patients occupying Royal Cornwall Hospital beds waiting for discharge. The impact of that is we're not able to maximise St Michael's Hospital as an elective orthopaedic centre and for other opportunities there. So if we can continue to make progress on the challenges in the urgent care pathway, those things will also translate back to increased capacity from an elective perspective, as well as addressing the quality aspects that Susan talked to earlier on.
Thank you. My point was on the safeguarding, and thank you, Carol. I wanted to raise a similar point, but Susan, you're absolutely right to say we have come a long way in Cornwall and we've got a long way to go. And so I'm a little bit concerned about pace on this.
Yeah.
Because as Carol says, we kind of know what the issues are. I suppose my question for assurance is, which body is working on taking this forward at pace in terms of collaboration and that information share that you refer to in here, because that has been pointed out as a child death cause since 1965, I think, and we've got to kind of get this cracked, haven't we? So who's in charge of making sure this gets pace?
So there's an executive group which I'm joining. I've yet to have my first meeting with our LADO and the leaders of our organisations. So I'm picking up all of the strands, because at the minute I think there's something like 45 different safeguarding meetings, and what we need to be really clear about, and this is the conversation I had with the LADO, is how do we coordinate all of that, because there is really good stuff going on, and we need to make sure that we're not missing things, that aren't falling through the gaps. So can I bring something back to next board, Mary, if that's okay, with members about how we're addressing the pace at which we work within safeguarding, and making sure that we've got the right assurance in the right place.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, Susan, can there not be an agreement that there is a lead organisation, though, within the group? Because I think, that's where things happen, rather than just leaving it to a group, because it'll just circulate around the group. I'll leave that with you anyway.
I'll come back to
leave
you.
that with you.
Okay. Sorry, Rachel. Yeah.
Can I just add something around the excess mortality? Because it's something that I've been looking into, and the team's looked at the ONS figures around it. And I just thought just a bit of context around this nationally, because it is a national issue, and where we sit in comparison to that excess mortality. So in Cornwall we have a 5% sort of excess mortality, compared to in the region Gloucestershire is the highest at 9%, and this is data between March 2020 and October 22, so it sort of covers the recent period and quite a long period. And just so I was interested that it wasn't necessarily just stroke that was something that was leading that. It's very clear that the sort of three areas, and this is regional data, but it's very likely that Cornwall would be similar, that actually heart failure was accounting for 18% of that difference, liver disease and cirrhosis 11%, and diabetes 15%. So I just thought that was helpful for the board to sort of give a perspective around some of the reasons and causes of that excess mortality according to death certificates and then ONS data, which obviously needs to be triangulated. But I thought that's a sort of information that would be helpful to board.
There's a few observations from me. I think I wrote out to some of you saying I actually thought this month's board pack was probably one of the best I'd seen since we started, and I think this is actually going exactly the right direction. So thank you for that. Like everything we can do, it can be better. So here's a few observations if it's helpful. And again, I'm trying to triangulate some of the discussion we're going to have later on in the afternoon with Pricewaterhouse. So I certainly know the non-execs have been quite keen to have this conversation about trajectory and actions, as Carol you just mentioned earlier on. Quite a lot of it is, excuse the way I'm going to put this, year-to-date performance, which is lovely when you're looking back in the rear view mirror, but we need to spend a little bit more of our time on what will it take, what do you need from us, what are the actions being taken, is it people, money, support, mandate, what is it going to take to shift this? We just need to move, not just to the quality report, but everything we do just needs to move into that. If we're here and we're not happy with it and we want to be there, what are we going to do? What are the things to make that happen? I think the more we can have that as an honest discussion between us, we might stand a chance of closing the gap. So I'd encourage you to think about how you do that. If you remember, I remarked to Rachel about in her previous paper on that page 3 with the colour thing here.
It doesn't.
There's something here for me about you need to read everything, which is probably important, but for an executive summary, it doesn't really act as an executive summary to me in terms of drawing your immediate attention to, look, from a quality perspective, with your clinical perspective and your colleagues, here are the things which you should be spending your time in the boardroom really focusing on, because if you crack those, they can have the biggest impact. It's not to say we're not interested in the others, but rather than have just the discussion about as an update, I think I'd like to increasingly move this into what do you want from us as a result of this that's actually going to require us to do something different. And I have no problem with you challenging us as a group to say what will it take to move us on in terms of quality.
So can I just offer a counter challenge?
Yeah,
so
yeah.
I think we need to look at this through an appropriate lens, because taking quality and safety, you can end up with lots and lots of, I mean, there's hundreds and hundreds of metrics that we look at. I think you're right. I think if we move to something like the, I have to say, I do like the approach that RCHT took with the SPC charts, because you can see the ups and the downs and whether or not you're going in the right direction. It's really helpful to do that. And I think that's something that we've been talking about adopting. I do think with quality and safety, you need a lens to look at it through. I think the 5 clinical strategic objectives gives some of that, not all of it. And I think if we keep pinning back, what you then see is where we've come from, where we're going, and what the impact is on our population in terms of their health and care needs, rather than continue to provide a report like this, because it could be war and peace and may still not get to the nub of the problem. So I think we need to go back with the clinical strategic priorities and be really clear about what those quality metrics are and agree those. But there will still be some that sit outside of it that I have to report and that are national as well.
Okay. You go.
I hear what you're saying, Susan, but from my point of view, I liked the quality of the information. I thought that the point that John was making would be the point I'd be making, is what's the headline from the content of the report? So what is it you want us to take out of the report? And if we're going to go into the detail, one of the recommendations was asking the CMO and the CNO to work with the quality chair to make sure that, I don't really think that's a recommendation. I mean, it just seems a bit odd to me. But that'd be what I'd be wanting. I'd be wanting to look at the cover report and see what are the key things that you want out of the content of that information that's in there. And I thought actually the content was about right, to be honest.
So
I did, but I'd want to know from a headline sheet what are the main things you want me to take out of this, because I might miss something in a chart. Anyone could miss something in a chart. You can present information in many different ways. So what are, from your professional background, do you want me to take out of that report?
Reflect on the previous conversation when we went round and I asked how's all the reporting. You responded that your committee needs a bit more going forward. I suspect that's why the recommendation is in there, to be fair.
Oh, okay.
Okay, all right.
Yeah,
so that's
fine. Okay.
Aimed at that. But this is the joining up then of your committee, this report, and I guess the challenge I would just like to lay down is that it is important that we're cited on what's happening.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's equally important that you challenge us by saying, and in order to change that, we need this, and this from this group of people. Because if not, it becomes a useful update, but the world doesn't shift. And if we collectively felt that we had to move X to Y to actually make the biggest impact on quality, this is the group of people we need to have that honest and robust debate with, really.
Completely agree.
Yeah?
Yeah.
So to me, I would just encourage you to think about what would be the 2 or 3 things that you would want out of here from that very long list of things that are really your asks from this group in order to make a dent in it. Is that fair?
That's fair.
Yeah? People happy with that? Emma?
Could I just perhaps suggest that we have a look collectively at the triple aim duty, because it's a really nice framework for how you present back information on outcomes and some of the output data that Susan and others will need to report on. And I'm not suggesting now, but it might provide us with a useful framework, and actually that helps us to look at the outcome that we're looking for around better population health and wellbeing, better quality of services, and that includes quality, safety and experience of people, and then improved efficiency and sustainability, and some of the things that we need to do to plug in to shift those levers. It might just be a useful framework. It's what I'm encouraging all of my teams to be thinking about in the voluntary sector.
I think challenge is really helpful, and one of the things we've already spoken about is stroke, and stroke is an area of performance which has very clear indicators that link directly to quality outcomes, and I wonder whether there's something for us to do as an example of what can to address, John, the challenge you just said about what needs to happen to deliver these improvements, and whether, Susan, there's something that you and I could take kind of jointly to rapidly progress further opportunities and perhaps bring something back as a trajectory for improvement, being clear what needs to happen and where that's within individual organisations' control or where it requires system-wide transformation.
Just before I bring in Rachel, again, Margaret, always leaves something in my mind each time we have a board meeting, Margaret. When you said earlier on what will we look like different going forward, to me it would be quite nice to have something in here that goes, what will it look like differently and what would it take to get there? I guess that's what I'm trying to unpack.
And to use the stroke example, we had in this region one of the best stroke services in the country, an SNAP highest level assessment. In terms of what that would look like, I would imagine our ambition is for it to return to that and to set
so what
out
would it take?
To set out the steps that it would take. So I think we could progress that.
And it is being progressed. So the stroke mortality group is meeting regularly, and as part of that, an improvement plan is coming out of that. And as CMO, I sit on that group. I'm also a stroke consultant by background, so that is being rapidly worked on.
Okay, lovely. Actually, did you want to add something?
I was just going to say, obviously, at the start we described how we will be bringing this together as an integrated report and indeed with workforce. So I think that's the opportunity for us to take away the comments here and actually for the cover sheet and that front door, we take on the comments and we together build what that looks like for next time.
Very good. Thank you very much. Let's move on to finance and performance. Now, just so you get a measure, we need to finish in half an hour. So we've got 10 minutes max on this one because we've got some other stuff. So away you go.
Well, I'll start with finance, then head over to Rachel. So firstly, I'm highly disappointed that finance hasn't come first on the agenda, but fully support the motivation to do it in the way that's been described. So I'll be brief. All I was going to do is highlight the forecast outturn remains as break even at this stage, which is a good position to be in, and also to underline the fact the month 7 numbers, it always seems strange, doesn't it, that we see our month 7 numbers the day before this meeting, but the month 7 numbers are consistent with continuing to project that position for the year end. We benefit now considerably from working closely with CFO colleagues across the other organisations, and you do get an impression of the position from the softer dialogue as well as the hard numbers. So the things that I would say are worth highlighting is we still feel there's an issue with the pay award in the system in terms of how it's if it's sufficiently resourced from a national allocation perspective, and that's a debate that's sitting with Southwest and HSEI. So that there is some risk there, but we still feel able to forecast an outturn position which is break even as described. The CIP delivery position has improved over the last couple of months, again supporting that outturn position I've just underlined. The main uncertainties at the moment, we believe, between our organisations sit clearly operationally. There's still a lot to go through in terms of winter. The plans we have in place are, we believe, resourced and resourced appropriately. So at the moment there's no particular issue with those. We also know that nationally there's a significant pressure on the NHS finances, which nationally they have yet to decide how they manage that. So part of the fiscal statement that comes out next week will give us a better view on whether it affects where we sit at the moment in terms of our outturn position. But besides those things, we're still comfortable to work with the position that's been reported in this report, as are my colleagues across the organisation. And again, to underline the fact that we are working closely together and we are finding ways to manage the positions across our different organisations, which I think is really, really helpful. I wanted to add a final little topic on the end. I don't think I picked it up last time, so it's just to thank the teams for their hard work, but also and this is RCHT and the ICB, we've reached accreditation level 2 in Future Focus Finance, which is a national programme to assess the quality and standard of the processes that we hold in place across our finance functions. AD's running up closely behind, and in his recent focus of work with CFT, but we actually sit quite well across the Southwest and are two of limited number of organisations in the patch to get to that level. So we see that as a bit of a plus, and I'd like to thank my teams and the teams of RCHT for getting us in that place. I would genuinely say it's happened around me, and I'm really appreciative of colleagues in terms of making that happen. So I also wanted to say that, and I guess a final point in terms of context is across the Southwest there are pressures. People are starting to reflect a difference in forecast outturn across ICBs. We'll be clear about that over the next couple of weeks. So we're sticking with our position in that context, but doing well at the moment with all the risks I've just described. Thank you
ever so much. Any questions? Andy?
It's quite a specific one, but I was just looking at the agency spend, and obviously we're within envelope and with a plan to break even position, but is there any consequence of us breaching the agency cap as a system?
We're monitored as a system, so, but in terms of the consequences of that, we get feedback through sort of performance management discussions, but there's no penalty or financial consequence of that at the moment, and we feel that if we continue as a system to deliver the right bottom line position, that will continue to be the case.
Okay.
Thank you.
This will probably show you I used to be a commercial director and not a finance director, this observation, so I'm going to get caught out, I can tell in advance. If you go to page 7 of your financial performance report, it's fantastic to see lots of zeros. That means we're in balance. What I didn't quite understand is when you add up ICB, RCHT and CFT, what is our total budget?
Our total budget is 1.2 billion or just under.
So when I add up what appears to be 923, 565 and 232, why do they not add up to 1.2?
We've still got areas like UHP, some other services that sit outside of those three main organisations.
So again, if we could just be really clear on the bits that we're accountable for, holding to budget and that kind of thing, and that, because I had not picked that up from here. So that's my first observation.
I was waiting for that to be picked up, John.
Thank you. And my other one is relating to a similar conversation about summarising on the operational performance. Really like it. I'm just wondering whether maybe quality might think about this. If you turn to page 20, just as an example, and look at this type of way of doing it, I'm not saying it's perfect, but as a set of matrices, it gives you some idea as to what the actions taken by the system, the recovery plans, the forecast looking forward. Even though in this particular document it still doesn't really get into the granularity of how you're going to crack it, it at least gives you a framework to actually think about what are the actions going forward, and then it gives. And the other thing we've got to think about is how, when as an executive group you then take this through our committees, how those committees gain assurance, and therefore this is, I suspect, a good mechanism for doing that. And again, just being consistent with what I said under the quality one, fantastic detail. If you read them all, it would be really nice to have some highs and lows summarised at the very top. So to me, it would be, do I need to read everything to know how we're doing on cancer? An executive summary would be really helpful, just to sort of give me a one-liner on, go here, look there, and then we can tease that out in this meeting again. Is that a fair challenge? You happy with that? Rachel, you happy with that?
Yeah, I mean, it'd be really helpful to get feedback, because on page 3 of the exec summary, we've obviously included the high-level performance, but it's whether actually there's a different way of presenting that in that table that we can do. Very happy to take comments that's in whether that cuts it or not, John.
I think what I'm looking for, if you could take it away with everybody else. Again, I come back to your chart that you had under your Transforming Care for Cornwall thing. What draws people's attention in this meeting to, can we talk about cancer? Can we talk about X? Can we talk about Y? And then we'll spend our time working out, if that's not where you want it to be, because it's your top list, what are we going to do about it? Does that work?
Yeah, I'll take that away.
But we need that really to come through the committee, particularly into here. Okay, another good report, going in the right direction, everyone. And we should actually say how many of the country's ICBs are targeting break even?
I don't know that.
Well, I'll help you. It's about a third.
Is it? Okay.
So we're in the right place.
Okay.
All right. Okay, shall we move on, everyone? Perfect timing.
Did you want me just to cover a couple of points on performance,
Yeah,
operational performance.
Yeah.
For board members, I'm just working through the summary on page through, and in the choreography of the meeting, we obviously covered a fair bit of updates from provider updates, but important to note the good and consistent progress we've got on our key standard this year around reducing 104-week waits, and those that are remaining are patient choice, so within the parameters. We are reducing our 78 weeks, but are off our trajectory, and part of the major gearing is the work that we're doing through quarters 3 and 4 with our ESRF. Now, this obviously is a report that takes us up to the August data, which is often slightly lower than our normal profile, and the data that I've seen for September, we do get the uptick back. But we still have work to do to get back on with that trajectory for 78 weeks. Key things that we've been working through with colleagues has been some additional IS sector capacity, particularly in our cardiology pathway through the Peninsula Heart Clinics as a major component in terms of that, and the ongoing connection to diagnostics, which I'm pleased to report some major things in terms of those activities of what looks different to make an impact of that, which haven't yet been reflected in the performance because they've only just come online, has obviously been the MRI pad that we now have, and the CT that will open from November in light of our CDC, which again is an important part of additional capacity to support our diagnostics, which obviously connects to elective and cancer. Specifically, cancer, we are lower in August than we were in July, which follows that profile but still isn't good enough in terms of where we need to be. A number of remedial plans working through with the Trust, which includes extended clinic days to expedite our capacity, additional resources in terms of workforce, which has been a rate limiting factor, and the Planned Care Board received the updated cancer trajectory in terms of bringing that back on track. In the way of governance, there were some questions to respond to and some adaptations to make to that, so I would expect that to come now into the next FPCC report. I did just want to also mention the improving picture in mental health, and I would just like to say is that the improving position for out of area placements is in days, so just so people don't feel alarmed in terms of the numbers there, but we are seeing that reduction reducing, but we need to watch that, I think, with particularly some of the issues that Debbie raised, just some of the fragility that we've got in that, so that remains a key focus for us, and our work around IAPT and our sustainability and our provision, which we also discussed at FPCC.
Celebrate that and move on. Steve.
Just a brief comment. I'm not sure if it's a formatting issue, but the detailed appendix on my copy shows the wrong SOF for RCHT. It should be SOF 3. So I wasn't sure why that was showing SOF 4.
That's from our previous report, so I'll check.
Get that away.
Yeah, I'll check.
Okay, thank you very much, everyone. So in terms of the recommendations, both for this and for quality, we'll take as stated. Lovely, thank you very much. Ooh.
On a separate point, sorry just
yes.
a separate point completely. As we're making updates or taking things away or going to report back more information, could those come out with the minutes so that we've sure we've got them? And that I know there'll be offline discussions, but I think for the board, we just need to see that coming back through the minutes.
Just help me say it. What is it specifically you're after?
Sorry, can you not hear me? It's just there's been a number of times during the meeting when we've said, oh, we'll take that away, or we'll come back to you or answer a question.
Yeah.
For instance, Ali doing that, or just now
Yes.
the correction. I think that needs to be represented in the minutes so we can see that it's happened.
Thank you. Absolutely. Sorry, yes.
Yes, okay. Can I pick up two things, if I may? And one of them's actually probably going to answer Mary's question, I hope. So just for confirmation, we're all in SOF 3, so that should be 3 across into that paper, so we'll correct that. The other thing is that around about actions that have been picked up, we've agreed that after this meeting, within 2 days, all of the actions, the minutes might not come out, but the actions will come out to everybody so that everybody is aware of their actions in advance of the next meeting.
Very
Okay, Mary?
That's
Thank
great.
you. And the idea, as I understand it, is those actions will then be carried back into the pack, so that
Yes.
this consistency, they just come out earlier.
Yep.
That's the idea.
And it's giving people time to obviously go away and actually do them, because from our meeting today to the upload of the next round of papers is 3 weeks, and that 3 weeks will just disappear.
Like it did last time, fellow members. Okay, moving on then. So the CQC, how will the system work? Now, we've read the paper. What would you like to get out of this meeting?
It's we as an ICS, that under the new Care and Quality Commission, they have new powers now to review and assess the functions of ICSs, and what we are asked to do is, as an ICS, to do a self-assessment against the CQC standards. So the paper, as well as setting out the changes within CQC, also seeks the recommendation seeks the board to agree to our process, which is on underneath the self-assessment roadmap on page 4. What we were planning to do, so that it was clean, was that we would bring in a third party to help us with that self-assessment and take us through that through a lens of well-led, which is, I know, a process that most all of our organisations are used to, and I think would be a useful way of us being able to frame our self-assessment. Because the ongoing inspections will continue. The inspections start as of April 2023. I don't know where we are in the pecking order with CQC in terms of whether or not we'll be at the top of the pile or slightly later. But I think if we start to do the preparatory work for the self-assessment in readiness for the start date of April 23, that would be really helpful. Thank you.
So is there anything, it doesn't say any recommendations, is there anything particularly that you want out of this?
The recommendations are at the front.
Can I list them?
Yes.
Recommendation.
The front. I thought for a minute I was having
yeah,
a senior
that's
moment.
okay. Didn't read the heading. Okay, so the reason why this is important is that, well, it's self-evident why it's important. I mean, trying to get your engagement and transparency of what's being required here in terms of this timeline, I think everyone would completely endorse getting that third party independent perspective on us, because we could easily pat ourselves on the back and miss some stuff. So I think that's, with your support, a pretty critical thing. Can I just rehearse again with you, when will that happen, and what does it mean in terms of engagement with others? Because I get the principle, I couldn't get from the paper what that would mean to each partner.
So if we can get the go-ahead, we'd be bringing in the third party to go through our project plan for this, because we need to be really clear that we're hitting all of the markers for the CQC, which is why we felt if we took it through a lens of well-led, that would be quite helpful.
So if you look at page 3, these are the 3 key headings with the 16 themes shown on there. Are we sure that we're actually capturing the evidence ourselves at the moment to be able to do some of this? Because even if it's a friendly external person who comes in, if we haven't got the evidence to be able to do it, they still won't find it. So how are we capturing to come under some of these headings? What they might need?
So there's been a huge amount of work already done. What we can't forget is all of our organisations will all have had CQC inspections. In fact, they've all been fairly recently. I think SWAST was 2018 was the last one, but all of the rest of us have been done within the last couple of years at least, and some much more recently. So all of the structures that are set up, John, are there ready to go. It's who we liaise, and we know that, for example, Kim O'Keefe, am I right in saying, Debbie, she's also the lead for CFT, so she certainly is in RCHT, and there are teams wrapped around that, John. As an ICS, we are pulling together our team around CQC inspection, because this is something fairly new for us.
So again, just to be helpful to me, if nobody else, is we're not a provider.
No, we're not.
There is something in the new CQC thing that's actually looking about how we can evidence that we're all working collaboratively. Who is your lead to get that kind of thing coming together?
So I'll be working with whoever we bring in, and then it might be helpful to take some of these discussions through SEG again, just to be really clear, because if we're going through for a leadership well-led, that feels like the right place.
No, that's fine.
And I think there'd be a second part around to that, and I think that's what Susan's alluding to. Is there will be CQC is always evidence-led and evidence-based, so therefore a lot of the evidence will be already sitting within our system. So therefore we need to kind of draw that in and collate it, which is the work that Susan's talking about. So this will be a collaborative approach of gathering that evidence and storing it to be able to.
So just before Sanj comes in, just so I'm clear, because I can see Emma wants to ask a question too, is this group of people coming in going to be a mock inspection, or are they going to actually help us collect the evidence to be able to do it? Which is it? Because they can't be poacher and gamekeeper.
No. It will be help us to prepare for the inspection and
For
also
the-
give us some guidance about not missing things, John, because this is quite a big piece of work.
Huge, absolutely. So we'll go Sanj and then Emma.
Is it the norm that we'd bring in a third party on a regular basis for this sort of piece of work, or is that surely not something that in the future we'd want to undertake ourselves? And secondly, I just noticed on the sort of three big themes, integration is definitely there. It's not reflected in the 5-year forward plan. In fact, I don't see integration at all in the 5-year forward plan, and I wonder whether that's something we should look at, especially as an ICS.
In answer to your first question, I think it would be helpful to bring a third party in as this initial, because it's unknown sort of territory for us to do this collectively. So I think that's really. I think as we go forward, what we just need to be really clear about is that in terms of marking your own homework, you don't miss anything.
Yeah, no, I agree. Emma.
Thank you. Thanks, John and Susan. So just a couple of observations. I guess one is for those wider stakeholder partners in the room, it is highly possible that the CQC will come knocking on the doors. It's a bit like a staff interview, I guess, the equivalent, to ask the LMC, Health Watch, all sorts of people how things are progressing. So the other observation was quite specific around in that report. There's a comment that primary care complaints data is invisible to the ICB at present. So just looking at it from a GP point of view, that can't be right, because it's actually it is reported to NHS England. I can see Rachel nodding her head. So it's definitely visible. So I just wanted to make that point just for awareness.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, so let's go back to those recommendations. We'll do them by exception again. There's 2 for half a dozen of them. Refresh your memories, have a quick scan down. You all happy? I shall take silence as acquiescence. Lovely, done.
Thank you
That's
very
approved.
much.
Thank you very much. So let's move on to the forward plan. So this is part 1 forward plan. This is what the executive group are proposing to come through over what time frame. I would suggest that you just spend a couple of seconds looking at this, because there have been discussions around signing these off and then suddenly we change what's in the planning cycle halfway through it. So honestly, this is not a just tick box exercise. This is really important to the executive group, that they get some sense as to this is what this board expects to see coming over these next few months. Because if not, we move into a second problem, which is we keep adding it for next month, we don't work on it, and then we kick it into the next one. That's not planning. So at the moment, we have for December elective recovery paper. So Rachel, do you genuinely believe that you'll have the opportunity, with everything else going on, to bring that back?
Yes, as I discussed on the Transforming Care for Cornwall, this is the products of the strategies. So those are specifically the business cases related to the Community Diagnostic Centre and our surgical unit. So those are going through the governance now and will be ready for December.
Aaron, are you sure about the integrated care strategy? Given you've spoken earlier on. Yes, thank you.
Rachel and I are
The
nodding.
Flow SCC winter room is a standing item. I'm assuming that will come back. Rachel, in terms of a Director of Public Health annual update, can we just understand what you think that actually might bring us? What is that doing?
Bringing the Director of Public Health annual report to the board.
Yeah.
It's a report that I would like to share with the board, but the particular subject is chosen to help inform the person-centred care aspect of the True North ambition. So I think it will particularly shed light on the work that's been done to try and get a bit more granularity about what some of that might mean. And I'm also sharing that across the council as well. So I'm very happy it's already written and available for people to read.
Thank you. EPRR assurance.
Yes, so there will be a paper, but that can be a very quick item, but we do have to do
we will have that. Digital strategy. Are we really ready for a digital strategy, including all the things that Lucy's going to be talking about she hasn't even started yet. Is it really the time to have a digital strategy at the next meeting?
It's with Simon and Kelvin.
I would need to check with Kelvin on.
I'll tell you where I'm just making a suggestion. If we're going to be citizen-centric, it would be helpful, I think, to at least have got your director of engagement in and having thinking about the touch points that are there to be thinking about in that.
Okay.
If this is a back office digital update, that's a different issue.
I was going to say, so this is not about engagement. This is Kelvin's digital strategy for the forward view. So this is around our EPR capabilities and a whole raft of other things as far as digital.
Okay.
So this is very separate from
Can
Lucy.
we badge it that then?
Yeah.
If you'd be so kind to badge it that way, that would be great. We've got approved seg terms of reference, and is that not done?
No, so there's an agenda item in the next part
That's what I
just to confirm around that. So there's a query around that. We may be
so
able
we'll
to
bring that one back
do
later
that.
on. And I heard someone mention earlier on about safeguarding and that kind of thing. Who's driving this one?
So I don't know who FF is, I have to say, but JC, I'm assuming, is the Lado John Clement.
So is this something that we want at the next meeting?
So we have got, we are due an annual report, but we've also got, which I forgot to say, we've got an NHS England review of our safeguarding processes, which will happen at the beginning of December. So I don't know whether or not that will be in time to hit board, John, but I'd like to bring it back to, it'll have to go through quality first, and then we'll take it back through perhaps January.
Thank you. So before
Susan did say you would bring back the update on...
I will bring that update back, yeah, absolutely.
So for colleagues who are in part two, the way it's going to pan out with PwC is we're going to have the executive summary, which you've seen effectively in the pack for part two, but we're going to actually bring the full item in the public domain for part one for December, for complete transparency, everyone. So that's what that's there for, and then you've got the rest of the papers. Have we missed anything? Is there any expectation? I'm sure you can think of something between now and the next 3 weeks, but it's not our intention. That's the point. Everybody happy with that? Everybody clear on the ask? Very good, thank you. So let's move on. Questions from members of the public relating to the agenda. So this is the public's opportunity. Well, you are the public, actually, unless there's anything you would like to ask. Okay, thank you, the public. I guess.
There's nothing from there.
No, all right, thank you very much. In which case, colleagues, how about that? 4 minutes early. Thank you very much indeed. Excellent meeting. We've got a half an hour break, I believe. Is that what it is? Have we got people from the ICA joining us? Do we know?
John, I can answer that. So we have, coming from the ICA forums, we have Juliet Ferris and Tamsin Craze.
Have some colleagues join. Excellent. So we'll have, for those who would like to meet our West ICA colleagues over lunch, they're in there. And if not, we'll start sharp at, I think it's 2:15. Yeah. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.